Chapter 465. Mo Jingxian actually fell asleep on her just like that? Faced with this unexpected predicament, Jin Wan subconsciously wanted to push the man on top of her away. But as soon as her hand touched the man's hair, she suddenly remembered his slightly frowning expression and Shenmu's words that he had been suffering from insomnia for years and hadn't had a good sleep for a long time. Should her heart soften? She didn't even think about it. In her heart, she directly refused. She shouldn't. However, Jin Wan was silent for a moment. Feeling the man's steady breath on her neck, she could only keep lying on the sofa and look at the bright crystal lights in the room. Forget it. Just let him sleep for 5 minutes. After all, she had just returned to High City, and MN Group's foundation in High City was not stable yet. Right now, their relationship was no longer that of a divorced husband and wife. They no longer loved each other. There were many things that didn't need to be said. However, it was precisely because she planned to treat him as the sky of High City from now on that they would be strangers if they ever met again. After all, if she really offended him and angered him, she probably wouldn't have any good days in High City in the future. For the sake of Mo Jingxian's status, she wouldn't offend him. She would give him 5 minutes to sleep. Only 5 minutes. She slowly let go of the man's hair, and then awkwardly and laboriously retracted her hands to her sides. Although Mo Jingxian was on top of her, making it impossible for her to leave, he did not do anything except kiss her domineeringly. Even after he fell asleep, he was still very well behaved, holding her waist with one hand. Jin Wan's cell phone fell to the ground by the door, and she had nothing in her hand. Every second felt like a year. In the first minute, she was still thinking that when she left the room, she must not be seen by other leaders or bosses. Otherwise, in the business world, all kinds of romantic things were common. If they saw it, she didn't know what they would think of her. Before the divorce, her entire life revolved around Mo Jingxian. If it could be said that even her studio and other aspects of her life were all because of Mo Jingxian, then after the divorce, it was as though she had completely separated herself from Mo Jingxian. She had a teacher and a friend in England. She had a noble and a friend. In the past 3 years, she had walked step by step on her own. She did not rely on Mo Jingxian at all. So of course, she didn't want others to see her and suspect that she had slept with Mo Jingxian, or that she had slept with some important people along the way to get up. No one liked to be judged by others in such a way that all their hard work would be erased. Furthermore, after the divorce, just as Mo Jingxian said, her life would return to its original trajectory. It didn't matter what the starting point was, but the divorce was indeed an important point in her life. The next minute she was still thinking about these things. 3 to 4 minutes later, the small incense burner on the coffee table still emitted light smoke. However, Jin Wan's eyelids gradually found it difficult to keep open. She slowly blinked several times, reminding herself not to fall asleep just like that. However, in less than 5 minutes, her eyelids were completely unable to keep open, and her breathing gradually evened out. The night passed quickly. The sound of running water could be heard from the bathroom. All of a sudden, there was a knock on the door. It was a little urgent and careful. Xiaoba knocked on the door for about 2 minutes before the door was abruptly opened. The curtains in the room were open, and light shone in from behind. The man's upper body was almost naked, his handsome and perfect figure was smooth, and his lower body was wrapped in a white bath towel. He held a bathrobe that he had grabbed at the last minute. His ink-black hair was as black as ink from being wet. But the main point was that his face was excessively handsome, because he saw that the person standing outside the door was a girl. Mo Jingxian put the bathrobe on. As he tied the belt, he coldly asked, "Looking for Jin Wan?" Xiaoba was already scared silly by the door. Earlier on, she had already instinctively raised her hands to cover her face and eyes. However, she still couldn't help but blush. She carefully parted her fingers. Seeing that Boss Missouri had already put on the bathrobe, she finally put her hands down. She looked inside and saw that Jin Wan's bag and cell phone were on the ground. Jin Wan's sunscreen jacket was also on the sofa. Even the hairband that Jin Wan usually used was scattered on the sofa. Xiaoba forcefully swallowed a mouthful of saliva. Without even thinking, she could guess what had happened last night. This was Mo Jingxian. Ah, if Boss had really slept with Boss Missouri, no one would dare to say a word. After all, they were husband and wife in the past. But last night, Jinwon clearly did not show any signs of contacting Mo Jingshan. Why did she become like this early in the morning? Mo, or CEO G, she's really here? Xiaoba's face was red as she stuttered, but she did not dare to look at Mo Jingshan's face. I called her, but she didn't pick up, so I came to look for her. Earlier on, I bumped into Assistant Shun. He seemed to have been playing cards all night and didn't sleep. He said that if CEO G didn't go back, she might be in this room. I didn't expect CEO Mo to be here. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to disturb you. I'm only here to look for CEO G. Mo Jingshan unhurriedly tied the belt on his bathrobe. He glanced at the direction of the bedroom. She's still sleeping. Hearing these words, it was as though something had really happened between him and Jinwon last night. If he was not Mo Jingshan, Xiaoba would have already rushed in with her bag and yelled pervert to save Jinwon. However, the other party was Mo Jingshan. Furthermore, at such a close distance, he was unbelievably handsome. She made a no sound and took a step back with a red face. She softly said, "Then when COG wakes up, please have her give me a call. I'll wait for her in the hotel lobby." Mo Jingshan's expression was cold, and he did not speak. Xiaoba continued to take a step back. With a pung sound, the door in front of her was slammed shut. Xiaoba leaned against the wall outside the door. Her heart was beating like a drum. This time, not only was she able to see President Mo through a computer video, nor was she able to see President Mo from a few meters away. She had even accidentally seen the legendary Boss Mo's bathing scene from less than a meter away. So handsome. Boss had actually slept with CEO Mo again? Did that mean that in the future, they could do whatever they wanted in Haicheng? When Jinwon opened her eyes, she was slightly dazed. What was going on? Why did she really fall asleep? She glanced out the window. The sky was already bright. She abruptly realized that she was actually lying on the bed. She immediately sat up, yanking the blanket aside to look at the clothes on her body. Aside from the sunscreen jacket, she was still wearing everything else. Chapter 466. More importantly, how did she end up on the bed after falling asleep? Jinwon rubbed her messy hair and got off the bed. When she walked out of the living room, the first thing she saw was Mo Jingshan, who had already changed his clothes. She paused for a moment. She saw that the man had most likely just showered and had a good night's sleep. He seemed to be in a good state of mind. She subconsciously glanced down at her own clothes and confirmed that nothing had happened last night. It was likely that he had carried her onto the bed after falling asleep. She recalled that when she was in Aolan International before the divorce, she had fallen asleep on the sofa because of a stomachache. That night, Mo Jingshan must have carried her to the bedroom to sleep. After all, he was the only one in the world who could make her defenseless when she fell asleep and be carried to the bed unconsciously. Jinwon glanced at the small incense burner on the coffee table. She could roughly guess why she had fallen asleep within a few minutes last night. This was truly an unexpected situation. She did not speak. She had already said everything she needed to say last night. She walked over to pick up her coat from the sofa and put it on. She saw that Mo Jingshan had already placed her phone and bag on the cabinet by the door. She walked over to pick up her bag and opened the door without saying a word. The moment she opened the door, she turned to look at the man who had no intention of stopping her. The morning sun landed on his body. The moon-white shirt from yesterday had disappeared and was replaced by a deep black. She looked at him. CEO Mo, you and I are both people with status. You know what you should and shouldn't do. It's already been more than 3 years. Let's just treat it as if nothing happened, okay? Mo Jingshan calmly looked at her. He did not agree or reject her. He only said, "Aren't you going to wash up before leaving?" "No need. I'll go back and wash up." Finishing her words, she opened the door and turned to leave. The sound of her high heels grew softer and softer. In the end, it was replaced by the sound of the elevator. It was the sound of her leaving. The room returned to silence. Mo Jingshan watched as the door closed once more. He turned to look outside. The sun was warm, and the blue sky stretched as far as the eye could see. It was as though Jin Wan's new life had been reborn, filled with confidence and vitality. From the corner of his eye, he suddenly caught sight of a woman's hair tie on the sofa. He walked over. He picked it up. After Jin Wan left the room, in order not to be seen by others, she did not look for Shen Mu. When she went downstairs, she suddenly saw Xiaoba waiting in the hall. Xiaoba hurried over and asked with a smile, "Boss, you're awake. How did you sleep last night?" Jin Wan immediately squinted at her. "When did you come?" "I arrived half an hour ago." Special Assistant Shen said you were in CEO Mo's room. When I went to knock on the door, CEO Mo said you were still sleeping. I guess you were exhausted last night. Xiaoba's eyes lit up as she giggled. Jin Wan's footsteps paused in an instant. She forced herself to stand firm on the spot, and then turned to Xiaoba with a jerk. "Last night wasn't what you think." "Oh, reuniting after a long separation and rekindling old love. I've never experienced this before. It's definitely different from my naive imagination." I understand. Little Mina continued to grin. Jin Wan. She didn't explain any further and walked straight out. She originally planned to drive, but Xiaoba eagerly invited her to sit in the back. Jin Wan did not reject, and only said that she wanted to go back to take a shower. Xiaoba directly drove her back. On the way back, the car was very quiet. Xiaoba saw that Jin Wan's expression was especially stern, and did not dare to ask any more nosy questions. She only drove quietly. Jin Wan sat in the back seat. After thinking for a long time, she picked up her phone and looked for Qin Sighting's number. It had been more than 3 years since they last contacted each other. She did not know if Qin Sighting was still in High City, nor did she know if he had changed his number. Back then, Jin Wan had cleared all of Qin Sighting's contact information, but she still kept Qin Sighting's number. After all, Qin Sighting had helped her with many things. She hesitated for a moment. Although she should have made up her mind, she couldn't be an ungrateful person. Not long after, the call was picked up. Qin Sighting's clear and magnetic voice was the same as before. Hello. Jin Wan had forgotten that she was using a different number from 3 years ago. She directly asked, "Dr. Qin, it's been many years since we last met. Are you still in High City?" The other side of the phone was silent for a long time. There seemed to be a pause. After a moment, Qin Sighting finally asked, "Jin Wan?" "Yes, it's me." Jin Wan's voice was calm. "After returning to the country, I haven't been able to meet Dr. Qin. In the end, I still have to call to trouble you. I'm really ashamed. I heard that you've returned. Why are you being so polite with me?" Jin Wan did not continue the small talk and directly said, "I heard from Shen Mu that Mo Jingxian has been suffering from insomnia for the past few years. What's going on?" Qin Sighting clearly did not expect Jin Wan to mention Mo Jingxian. He was silent for a moment and did not ask further. He only answered, "For the past 3 years, he has indeed had this illness, but it's not as serious as Shen Mu said. It's true that he often has trouble sleeping at night, but this can't be considered a long-term illness. More importantly, he often works overtime and stays up late. There are all kinds of people in the country's business world, and the atmosphere of the upper class is inseparable from alcohol. It's inevitable that he will drink some alcohol. After enduring day after day, his body will definitely feel uncomfortable. Generally speaking, it's because he doesn't sleep well. Coupled with tiredness and excessive socializing, he will occasionally have a headache. However, after a good night's sleep, he'll be fine. It's because of the lack of rest." "That's right. Ever since your divorce." Qin Sighting paused. "Ever since 3 years ago, he has been constantly working hard. He rarely listens to others' advice, and goes home early to rest. He's just taking advantage of his youth. If it were someone in his 40s or 50s, he would have died long ago." "All right, I understand. Thank you, Dr. Qin. Why are you suddenly asking about him? Is there something going on between the two of you?" "No, don't misunderstand. I just met him last night, and heard about this from Shen Mu. After returning to the country, I haven't had the chance to greet Dr. Qin. I thought of giving you a call and asked in passing." Qin Sighting smiled and did not ask further. "All right, we'll meet again when we have time. But right now you're a busy person. I'm afraid I won't be as busy as you. Dr. Qin, you're being too polite." You hold a scalpel to save people, while I'm in the business world. I've only learned how to be treacherous and become an unscrupulous businessman. How would I dare to compare myself to Dr. Chin? Not bad. It's been a few years since we last met, and you've become so polite. Chapter 467. Boss. Something happened. In MN Group's office, Jinwon had just returned from meeting a business partner. Before she could sit down, she heard Xiaoba run in, rushing over with a newspaper in her hand. What are you doing? How old are you? You should have gained some experience after staying in England for the past few years. Why are you still so impatient? Jinwon glanced at her unhappily. Something really happened. Xiaoba slammed the newspaper on the office table. Look, when you went to the meeting and dinner with the leaders in the city last time, didn't this CEO Zhang of Ming High Company take advantage of you at the dinner table? I don't know who took this photo of him touching your hand and sold it to the media. Right now, the financial news is almost taken over by gossip. They're all saying that you slept all the way up. A bunch of people in the industry are gossiping about you. I think it won't be long before the news of your marriage with Mo will be revealed again. Jinwon finally took the newspaper. This photo was clearly taken from an angle. CEO Zhang was indeed sitting next to me, but he asked me to pass him a toothpick. The toothpick was so small, and it was hard to see it clearly. It looks like I took the initiative to hold his hand. It's just a matter of the angle, Jinwon said without changing her expression. Of course I know it's a matter of the angle. I also know that you've rejected so many men. Although you usually do what you should, you've never been taken advantage of by anyone. This photo clearly shows that some companies are jealous of our MN group and are deliberately targeting you. But I heard that CEO Zhang's wife is famous for being a tough woman in high city. Because her family used to be in the loan business, she's especially domineering. Right now, we can use some money to suppress the media and stop them from spreading such nonsense. But CEO Zhang's wife is not easy to deal with. Earlier, I heard from the security guard that a group of people ran to our company and splashed 2 buckets of dog blood. They stood outside and called you a vixen. Really? So lively? Different from Xiaoba's anxious and worried expression, Jinwon curved the corner of her lips, turned to the window, and looked downstairs. I can't see them now. The security guard has already sent them away. But I'm afraid that those people who came to make trouble must have been photographed by some busybody. I've already spoken to the media, but I'm afraid that CEO Zhang's wife will continue to make trouble. Even if the media blows over, they won't be able to stop privately. Is CEO Zhang's wife so tough? I heard that CEO Zhang did have an affair 2 years ago, but it was only when he came back from a business trip with the new secretary of his company. They hugged each other in the car ambiguously. In the end, it was discovered by his wife. I heard that CEO Zhang's secretary was dragged into the company by his wife when she was at work. She stripped the secretary's clothes in front of everyone and whipped the secretary. It was said that because she was naked at that time, even the flesh on her chest was smashed. Later, many policemen went to the scene to stop the matter. Otherwise, the secretary would have been beaten to death on the spot. Hearing this, Jinwon raised her brows thoughtfully. It seemed like she was indeed a vicious and merciless person, with a powerful background that no one dared to provoke. If this misunderstanding was not resolved, she would inevitably have to be careful in High City in the future. Isn't Feng Ling free in America? Do you want her to come back to accompany you for a few months? Xiaoba asked. No need. She's being detained by Nanheng and can't come at all. Besides, there's no need to look for her just because there's a little danger. Then what should we do? Hire a few more bodyguards for you? Jinwon smiled as she glanced at Xiaoba. She then picked up the newspaper to take a look. In the newspaper, it appeared as though she had taken the initiative to hold CEO Zhang's hand. From this angle, she was smiling very brightly. Furthermore, she was sitting very close to CEO Zhang. It did appear as though they were intimate. She put down the newspaper again and said, "Help me make an appointment with CEO Zhang tonight. Tell him I'll wait for him at the KTV near our company." Xiaoba looked at her with a dumbfounded expression. What time is it now? Shouldn't we avoid arousing suspicion? You actually want me to help you make an appointment with CEO Zhang? And meet him personally? And at a place like KTV? Jinwon glanced at her. Can't you bring more people from the company with you? Minghai Company can be considered a stable business partner of ours. Firstly, I can't lose my reputation. Secondly, I can't destroy the contract between our two companies. I can't shed all pretense of cordiality with them. Then why are you doing this? Don't ask so much. Just do as I say. Xiaoba pursed her lips. If I help you make an appointment with CEO Zhang, he will definitely come. He won't care so much. In any case, even if he really has an affair, his wife will only teach him a lesson and won't do anything to him. I can tell that CEO Zhang has long been drooling over you. If he can do anything ambiguous with you, he will most likely be willing to come regardless of the risk. It's even better that he's willing to come. It saves us the trouble. Jinwon casually tossed the newspaper on her desk into the wastebasket. Just do as I say. Tonight, go to KTV with CEO Zhang. You can go back to work after making the appointment. Don't be affected by this matter. Xiaoba truly did not understand what Jinwon was thinking. However, when she thought about how Jinwon rarely suffered losses, she knew what she was doing. Furthermore, due to her beautiful face, many women were jealous of her. Not to mention the women in the country. Even when she was abroad, there would often be people gossiping about her behind her back. The tallest tree in the forest was the first to be destroyed by the wind. Those who stood too tall and were too beautiful would inevitably be provoked in the open. Then I'll send a few more bodyguards tonight. I'll also send some of the company's male employees. I'll also have a few assistants to go with you. There's no need to do that. Just call a few of the people who usually go with CEO Zhang when we discuss our cooperation. The most important thing is to be more natural. Don't make it seem like you're going to fight. All right. Could it be that they weren't going to fight? Xiaoba scratched her head. She saw the hot water bottle Jinwon had placed on the sofa and walked over to pick it up. Boss, is your period coming today? Does your stomach hurt? Do you want me to help you brew some brown sugar water? All right. The hot water bottle is too heavy. I have a heating pad here for you to use. Jinwon waved her hand. Go back to work first. Right now, I'm not as afraid of the cold as before. It doesn't hurt as much. I'll be fine after drinking some hot water. Chapter 468. That night, there were many security guards gathered below MN Group. However, Jinwon did not bring a single one with her. Just as she had requested, she only brought along the secretaries and assistants who usually followed her around to socialize, including Xiaoba. When they arrived at the KTV, CEO Zhang was already waiting there. However, he had specially brought along 2 bodyguards to wait outside the KTV. The moment he saw Jinwon, CEO Zhang's eyes immediately lit up as he approached. He reached out to hold Jinwon's hand. Jinwon calmly avoided him, smiling as she said, CEO Zhang, this KTV is crowded. Let's go in and chat. Her words were somewhat ambiguous. CEO Zhang immediately nodded and extended his hand to invite Jinwon in. As they walked, he said, CEO G, I'm really sorry. I didn't expect that such a thing would happen when I asked you to pass me a toothpick that day. Please don't take the news too seriously. I'll definitely explain it clearly to the media. It's not important whether you explain it or not. People like us usually use the same method when faced with such baseless news. We use money to buy over the media and suppress them. It's not difficult to erase the rumors in the media. But what's important is the relationship between CEO Zhang and CEO Zhang. It can't be changed because of such a thing. Jinwon smiled as she spoke. She winked at CEO Zhang and walked in. CEO Zhang did not expect Jinwon to be so sensible. He pushed open the KTV room's door and smiled as he invited her in. He saw that the people accompanying her were still the secretaries and assistants she usually brought to discuss their cooperation. She did not bring anyone else with her, so he believed that she was only here to discuss their cooperation and to have a chat. However, since Jinwon was the one who took the initiative to invite him, and the media had also spread such rumors, CEO Zhang instinctively felt that perhaps Jinwon was also interested in him. After sitting down, CEO Zhang opened a bottle of wine and placed it in front of Jinwon. He took the initiative to lean in to say, to be honest, I was also very surprised when I saw the photo in the media. I didn't expect there to be so many despicable people in our business circle. They clearly saw that there was no relationship between the two of us. Yet they deliberately took such a photo to make people panic. CEO G, your reputation has been affected. I'm really sorry. Jean Won glanced at the wine on the coffee table and did not pick it up to drink. As CEO Zhang inched closer to her, she stealthily avoided him. She maintained a calm smile on her face. It's just a toothpick. CEO Zhang, don't take it to heart. Didn't we talk about future cooperation during our previous meal? I'm afraid that you've forgotten all about this matter, haven't you? No, how could I forget my agreement with CEO G? Isn't it just to increase MN Group's profits by another 10%? That's fine, that's fine. I agreed to it back then. CEO G, did you bring the contract with you? It's not just 10%. I've been calculating for the past few days. MN Group has contributed more than half of the planning and manpower for this project. I mean to increase it by 25%. On top of the 10% you agreed to last time, I'll add another 15%. At this point, Jinwan smiled at CEO Zhang's suddenly stunned expression. CEO Zhang, we're not asking for an exorbitant price. You should know that without MN Group's planning and our core personnel, this project can't be completed. It's reasonable for me to increase this portion. CEO Zhang hesitated for a moment. After Xiaoba handed him the contract with an eager expression, he picked it up and glanced through it. He had thought that Jean Wan invited him here today to talk about the scandal. He wanted to confess to her that he was indeed interested in her, and hoped that he could have a chance to see her more in the future, or develop a deeper relationship with her. However, he did not expect that Jean Wan, who had been smiling so brightly at the door and easily misunderstood, now that she had entered the private room, she was serious and only here to raise the price. But this time, he did bring Jean Wan trouble, and Jean Wan's request was actually within a reasonable range. However, he had never thought of raising the price by more than 10%. After all, this 25% difference in profits was more than 300 million yuan. It was only a project that could last for a few months. Although it was indeed profitable, this MN Group really knew how to make money. CEO Zhang, are you not satisfied with this price? It just so happens that our cooperation hasn't officially begun. Neither side has sent any relevant personnel, and our time hasn't been occupied. It's fine if we stop this new cooperation now. Recently, I've been busy with trivial matters, and really don't have the time to discuss these matters. If we can't settle this project today, I won't have the time in the future. I can only send my assistant and secretary. They're only following orders, and it won't be easy for us to negotiate. Besides, CEO Zhang and I are very close. If it's someone else talking to you, it won't be easy for you to negotiate, will it? CEO Zhang stared at Jean Wan's smiling expression and suddenly cursed in his heart. Mother. This woman looked like a beautiful and harmless little rabbit. But why was she so shrewd in her bones? No wonder MN Group developed so quickly in the hands of a young woman like her. It seemed like she really had some tricks up her sleeve. Taking advantage of this opportunity, he couldn't let go of this cooperation project. Otherwise, not only would he lose 300 million yuan, but he would also lose all the profits to his other partners. If the scandal hadn't happened, perhaps he could put on a cold face and hang on for a while longer, keeping as much profit as he could. But now, he was stuck at a time like this. Jean Wan had clearly shown that she didn't intend to insist on cooperating with him. It seemed like she actually quite minded meeting him again. If he didn't even have a chance in the future, he wouldn't be able to put on a cold face and put on airs. Right now, Jean Wan was giving him a choice. She was also clearly telling him that this was the last time they would meet before the project was confirmed. If they could come to an agreement, then they would. If they couldn't, then they would part ways and never see each other again. It was also a good way to avoid arousing suspicion. Everything was reasonable, and no one could find fault with it. CEO Zhang smiled and glanced at the contract in his hand. He seemed to be wavering, but his words were still somewhat unhappy. He said, CEO G is really amazing. Don't tell me that photo was taken by CEO G. Chapter 469. Well, with that one sentence of hers, it could be said that she had revealed all of his secrets. It seemed like Jin-won knew about his ambiguous relationship with his secretary, and how his wife came knocking on his door. Thus, Jin-won had no interest in him at all. From start to finish, she was only here for this contract. She was clearly using this opportunity to raise the price. Furthermore, she had smiled ambiguously at him outside the KTV earlier. If people outside saw this, they would easily misunderstand what was going on inside. If Jin-won was more careful, his wife would most likely be on her way here. Thinking about it carefully, the person who intentionally leaked the news of their meeting to his wife was most likely Jin-won. In other words, the only person who could protect him right now was Jin-won. Or rather, the two of them could only protect each other. If she let go of this matter and did not explain herself, his wife would most likely cause some trouble here today. However, Jin-won was right. This 300 million yuan of profit was indeed a small favor to MN Group. It was not something to be proud of. There was indeed no need for her to cause trouble for herself in exchange for this 15% promotion. CEO Zhang had been in the business world for so many years, but this was the first time he was made a fool of by a 24-year-old girl. In the end, he could not even vent his anger, and could only hold it in. He even had to put on a smiling face. Let me take a look at the contract and calculate it. If it's okay, we can discuss it again. CEO Zhang took a step back, but did not make a firm promise. Jin-won placed the contract on the coffee table. Okay, CEO Zhang, take a look first. Once you're sure, call me or inform my assistant. I'll go to the bathroom first. Alright. CEO Ji, please. Jin-won stood up. Xiao Ba and the other secretaries sat on the sofa without moving. After all, they did not know what Jin-won was planning today. However, they felt a chill down their spines. They felt like CEO Zhang's wife would come charging at them at any moment. Xiao Ba, bring my bag over, Jin-won said. Xiao Ba rushed to hand Jin-won's bag to her. She then watched as Jin-won calmly entered the bathroom, without the slightest hint of nervousness. As soon as the bathroom door closed, there was a sudden commotion outside. Little 8 and a few secretaries sat on the sofa and looked at each other. When Director Zhang heard the commotion outside, he furrowed his brows. He hurriedly got up and opened the door a crack with a guilty look on his face. After taking a look outside, he hurriedly called for the security guard outside and whispered, "The person causing trouble outside is my wife. Don't let her know that I'm here. If she comes looking for me, just tell her that I've just left." The security guard nodded with a confused look on his face. At this time, the noise outside was even louder. CEO Zhang gritted his teeth in anger when he thought of how he had been tricked by Jin-won today. Originally, he wanted to take advantage of MN Group before they established themselves in Haicheng to gain more profits. In the end, not only did he fail to gain any advantage, but Jin-won even used this scandal to turn the tables on him. Where's my husband? Didn't someone just take a photo of him flirting with that little vixen surnamed Ji outside this KTV? Where is he? Get them to scram out here. Mrs. Zhang, who was outside, shouted while holding a cigarette. She rushed in despite the security guard's obstruction. Hearing the powerful voice outside, the two colleagues sitting by Little 8's side hurriedly huddled together. They moved closer to Little 8 and asked worriedly, "What should we do? It seems like they're really fierce." Little 8 turned to look in the direction of the bathroom and whispered, "COG should have a way. Let's wait and see first." Although she was also quite nervous, when she thought of how confident her boss was, she felt that there shouldn't be any problems today. Mrs. Zhang continued to shout outside. The security guards kept rushing over to stop her. But who would have thought that Mrs. Zhang actually brought so many people over? Men and women, rough, and those with some skills, none of them could stop her. They could only hear her shouting as she rushed in. "The one surnamed Zhang. Come out here. You dare to chase after a mistress right in front of me? Do you really not take this old lady seriously? You actually dare to come to a place like KTV. Zhang Dahong, get out here." Mrs. Zhang, don't be agitated. CEO Zhang really isn't here right now. He already left just now. You won't be able to find him even if you come here. CEO Zhang has already. Scram. Who the F***ck do you think you are? How dare you lie in front of this old lady? I clearly saw his car parked outside. CEO Zhang drank and left in someone else's car. Mrs. Zhang, don't go in anymore. There are other customers in our KTV rooms. You're really affecting our business. Scram. Mrs. Zhang. I told you to scram. Don't refuse a toast only to drink a forfeit. Scram. I am Mrs. Zhang. Why are you hitting people? Scram. If you don't scram, this old lady will break your legs. The group of security guards outside immediately quietened down. The two colleagues sitting by little Eight's side. As expected of a shrew, looking at CEO Zhang anxiously pacing back and forth in the room. It was clear how afraid he was of his wife. It was no wonder that although he had a lecherous appearance and always glanced at their CEO G, he never had the guts to do anything. Today CEO G had seduced his guts out. In the end, he even attracted his wife. Little Eight sister, will someone die? Little Eight did not speak. She lowered her head and was about to take out her phone from her bag. She was considering if she should call the police. If a fight really broke out, it would be good if the police could arrive in time. In the end, she had just rummaged through her bag when she suddenly saw the heat pad she had prepared for Jin Wan. Little Eight immediately felt a flash of inspiration. She seemed to understand Jin Wan's intentions. She did not take out her phone but slowly closed her bag. She then turned to CEO Zhang. CEO Zhang, your wife sounds really impressive. CEO Zhang immediately narrowed his eyes at Little Eight in displeasure. He said meaningfully, your CEO G is also quite impressive. As he spoke, he even gave her a thumbs up. However, his actions were slightly harsh and he was gritting his teeth. It was clear that he was extremely angry and anxious. Little Eight narrowed her eyes and smiled. She did not speak further. Zhang Dahong, if you don't scram out, this old lady will burn down your company. Come out. Chapter 470. Right now, the only place he could hide was the restroom. However, the restroom was occupied by Jin Wan. A loud knocking sound suddenly came from the private room's door. The knocking was heavy and fierce, causing one's heart to flutter. Come out. Scram out here for this old lady. The private room's door was slammed open at this moment. CEO Zhang's 1.8 meters tall and fat body could not help but tremble. Mrs. Zhang rushed in. She was also very fat, around 1.7 meters tall. Among women, she could be considered very strong. With one look, it was clear that she was not someone to be bullied. When Mrs. Zhang saw CEO Zhang, she rushed up and grabbed his ear while scolding. You're really bold. You really have guts, You actually dare to fool around with other women outside. Where's that vixen called Jin Wan? Didn't she come with you? Didn't you flirt outside the KTV? Where is she? Did she really turn into a vixen and disappear? When Xiaoba heard these words, she immediately stood up from the sofa. Mrs. Zhang, please watch your mouth. Our CEO G is here today to discuss a collaboration with CEO Zhang. If you know about CEO Zhang, you should know that Ming Hai Company has recently partnered with our MN Group on a new project. We're currently discussing how to split the profits. The contract is still here. Mrs. Zhang immediately glared fiercely at Xiao Wan. Seeing a young lady like her, she narrowed her eyes in anger. Who are you? I'm CEO G's assistant. Assistant. Mrs. Zhang abruptly twisted CEO Zhang's ear harshly. Not bad. Even a lousy assistant of that vixen dares to speak to this old lady, with such an attitude. Speak, how many times have you slept with her? You even dare to touch the dirt on my head. Be gentler. Gentler. CEO Zhang's ear was twisted. His tall and fat figure was pushed onto the sofa by Mrs. Zhang. He spoke helplessly and evasively. CEO G, and I really aren't like what you think. It's all a misunderstanding. I already explained it to you at home yesterday. At that time, CEO G handed me a toothpick in that photo. It's not like you don't know that I always get my teeth stuck when I eat. Not only did Mrs. Zhang not let go, but she almost twisted his ear off. I've been with you for most of my life. Do you think I don't know what kind of person you are? You think that the vixen is pretty? Why don't you ask someone to pass you a toothpick? Fine. If you say that the photo isn't evidence, then what about the photo of you laughing with that vixen in front of the KTV? The news and photos had just been released. and they hadn't even warmed up yet. In the blink of an eye, the two of you were together in the KTV downstairs. If there was really nothing going on, shouldn't the two of you be avoiding each other? Why are they gathering together even more arrogantly? Aren't we talking about cooperation? The contract is right here. Take a look at it yourself. What am I looking at? Casually placing a few pieces of paper here, and you're talking about cooperation? Why don't you just place the divorce agreement with me here, so that the vixen surnamed G can sleep with you without worry? How would I dare to divorce? I don't dare. CEO Zhang smiled apologetically. He raised his hand and waved it off, but because of the pain in his ear, his entire face turned pale. Xiaoba muttered in her heart. This CEO Zhang looks tall and strong, and he's usually very impressive in the circle. I didn't expect him to be so cowardly in front of his wife. Where did that vixen go? As Mrs. Zhang spoke, she turned to look at Xiaoba and the others. Seeing that they were completely unable to show their faces in public, she did not vent her anger on them. At this moment, the sound of the toilet flushing could be heard from the bathroom. Mrs. Zhang immediately turned to look at the bathroom door. She abruptly released CEO Zhang's ear and turned to grab an unopened bottle of beer from the coffee table. She smashed it harshly against the coffee table, shattering the bottle in half and causing the beer to splash out. She raised the sharp bottle and rushed to the bathroom door, scolding, "Little vixen, let's see where else you can hide. If this old lady doesn't scrape your face today, my surname isn't." Before she finished speaking, the door of the bathroom in front of her was suddenly pushed open from the inside out. Because Mrs. Zhang was standing too close, she was forced to take 2 steps back. When she raised the bottle of beer to face Jin Wan was holding her bag in one hand and a small pack of tampons in the other. Seeing Mrs. Zhang, she asked in surprise, "Earlier, I heard the commotion from inside. Are you Mrs. Zhang?" Mrs. Zhang saw that Jin Wan was able to remain calm even after hearing the commotion, and immediately scolded. "Saw, how dare you seduce my husband? Tell me, how many times have you slept with him? Where are you planning to go to sleep today?" The corners of Jin Wan's eyes twitched slightly. She glanced at the beer bottle in Mrs. Zhang's hand and smiled. "Mrs. Zhang, you've misunderstood. CEO Zhang and I are indeed here to discuss the contract. If not, why would I bring so many secretaries and assistants here? If there's any misunderstanding, let's sit down and talk. This is a lawful society. There's no need to fight and kill. To deal with shameless vixens like you, there's no need to be too polite." Mrs. Zhang saw that Jin Wan's aura was so calm and did not show the slightest bit of panic as a mistress. She could not help but calm down as well. She was not in a rush to do anything to her. She held the beer bottle in one hand and placed the other on her waist. With a heavy puff of smoke, she scolded, "Don't think that just because I don't know how to do business, I can't tell what the two of you are doing here. What contract? Did you think you could hide it from everyone by calling a small assistant over? Otherwise, what does Mrs. Zhang think we usually do when we come out to discuss business, eat, drink, and socialize?" Jin Wan retorted. Mrs. Zhang was stunned for a moment. It was clear that she had never come out to do business before. She glanced at Jin Wan's beautiful smile, and then at Jin Wan's figure. She was so angry that she suddenly turned to glare harshly at CEO Zhang, who had already walked over, but did not dare to make a sound. "This kind of woman is very pleasurable to sleep with, isn't it? There's nothing between me and CEO G. There's nothing between us." CEO Zhang furrowed his brows as he explained. "Mrs. Zhang." Jin Wan gently raised the small pack of tampons in her hand. "Without any evidence, you insist that I have an affair with your husband. You're the one in the wrong. Besides, I'm on my period today. It seems like there's nothing else I can do apart from discussing the cooperation." Hearing the words period, Mrs. Zhang looked toward the tampons in Jin Wan's hand with confusion. Chapter 471. Mrs. Zhang's expression was ugly as she glanced at her. She looked her up and down. She saw that Jin Wan's clothes were neat, and her hair was not messy at all. Furthermore, she did not smell of alcohol at all. She then glanced at the secretaries and assistants near the sofa, as well as the contract on the coffee table. Afterward, she reluctantly entered the bathroom and came out after a while. Jin Wan raised her brows and watched Mrs. Zhang's expression, which had already softened. Jin Wan raised her brows and watched her expression that had softened. It's indeed not good to talk about my period in front of a man. Besides, it's a taboo for men, especially for businessmen. Seeing blood on the bed is a big taboo for businessmen. I don't know if your CEO Zhang will mind this, but as a businessman I do. Tell me, in my current situation, how could I possibly have that kind of relationship with CEO Zhang? Jin Wan raised her brows and looked at her. You've never slept together before? Mrs. Zhang glared at her unforgivingly. To catch a person, you have to catch them dirty. To catch adultery, you have to do it on the bed. The photo of us at the dinner table was taken by someone maliciously. Besides, at that time, CEO Zhang and I did not even touch each other's hands. If you take a closer look at the photo, you'll be able to tell the truth. You've been in this circle for a long time, so you should know that people in both the business and political worlds are not so simple. It's common for people to use underhanded means against someone they don't like. Mrs. Zhang, you should have heard of many disasters caused by such groundless photos. As Jin Wan spoke, she placed the small packet of tampons back into her bag. She then said, "As for today, I don't care where you heard the rumors, but since you've come and seen it for yourself, there's nothing between CEO Zhang and CEO Zhang. There's nothing going on between us. If there really is something between us, and we insist on meeting at such a time, I shouldn't have chosen to meet on my period. Mrs. Zhang, you should understand what I mean." Mrs. Zhang listened to her words, but her expression was still somewhat ugly. "Who knows if the two of you are messing with me? People like you are too smart. Otherwise you wouldn't have." I advise Mrs. Zhang to be more rational. Even if you want to catch a mistress, you have to look at the cause and effect. CEO Zhang is indeed a good man, but I don't think I'm at the stage where I need to be CEO Zhang's mistress. I've only just returned to the country, and am still unfamiliar with Haicheng's business and upper class. Usually, if a CEO asks me to help pass him a toothpick, I wouldn't have any reason to refuse. Furthermore, we're here to discuss a collaboration, and we've even chosen to meet downstairs of our company. With such a close distance, unless you're looking at it with a perverted eye, no matter how you look at it, this looks like an open and above-board business discussion. The security guard outside also came in. Hearing Jin Wan's words, he rushed to agree. "That's right, Mrs. Zhang. CEO Ji often chooses our KTV to discuss business with other people in her company, because our KTV is newly opened. The environment is good, the space is large, and the soundproofing is good. It won't be too noisy. Furthermore, our place is very clean and close to CEO Ji's company." Not only did she come here with CEO Zhang, a few days ago, the wives of some of the company's CEO also came with them. We really don't have any messy matters here. There isn't even a guest room upstairs. It's impossible for something like what you're thinking to happen. Mrs. Zhang's expression was slightly embarrassed. At this moment, Xiaoba came over and took out a heat pack from her bag. "CEO Ji, this is the heat pack you requested. You came out to discuss business with a stomach ache during your period, yet you encountered such a thing. I'm guessing your stomach is still feeling unwell, right?" Hearing this, Mrs. Zhang glanced at Jin Wan. Indeed, her face was slightly pale. Jin Wan did not put on any makeup, nor did she put on any powder, so it was easy to see that she was slightly pale. She was most likely feeling unwell due to her period. By the side, CEO Zhang squeezed out a smile. "I really didn't expect CEO Ji to be so professional. Even if you're feeling unwell, you still personally came to discuss the contract. I'll sign the 25% you mentioned earlier. Don't waste your time." The reason he was willing to sign the contract was naturally because his wife was here. Even if he wanted to put on an act, he had to put on a good show. Otherwise, he would still be in trouble when he returned home. Xiaoba and the rest did not expect CEO Zhang to agree so readily. While secretly rejoicing, they secretly glanced at Jin Wan. However, they saw that Jin Wan remained calm and quiet with a smile. "Then I'll have to thank CEO Zhang. It's also my fault for causing your wife to misunderstand and almost cause disharmony in your family. It's a good thing that we have the chance to clear things up here. I believe that someone as reasonable as Mrs. Zhang will definitely not misunderstand anything because of something that doesn't exist. Right now in this business world there are many women. Usually when you go out, you have to face all sorts of people, both men and women. I advise Mrs. Zhang not to just listen to the wind. Everything has to be based on evidence. Mrs. Zhang kept a straight face and did not speak further. However, she was clearly unhappy and felt that she had lost face. When Jin Wan turned to return to the sofa, CEO Zhang intentionally walked over with a smile in order to show that he was truly here to discuss the contract. He maintained a polite smile, as though he was discussing business. CEO Ji, let me take a look at the contract. I'll sign it. CEO Zhang has really agreed? After all, there's still a difference of 300 million. Jin Wan handed the contract to him and purposely asked. I've thought about it earlier. Our Minghai Company and MN Group still have a long way to go. We have to confirm this project first. If we continue to delay it, it won't be beneficial to either party. This 25% is indeed reasonable. Mrs. Zhang did not understand what they were talking about. She only leaned over to take a look at the contract in CEO Zhang's hands. It really was a project agreement with MN Group. She stood behind CEO Zhang and said with a threatening expression, I'll wait for you outside. Hurry up and come out. All right. I'll go out immediately after signing it. CEO Zhang's expression was serious as though business was the most important thing. Mrs. Zhang finally rolled her eyes. She no longer looked at Jin Wan and the others in the private room. She turned and led her people away. Finally, the door to the private room was closed. Mrs. Zhang thought for a moment and pressed her ear against the door to eavesdrop. As CEO Zhang signed the contract, he raised his eyes to look at Jin Wan, whose expression was normal. He guessed that his wife was eavesdropping outside the door, so he did not say anything. After signing the contract, he raised his hand and gave Jin Wan a thumbs up, mouthing, You're awesome. Chapter 472. CEO Zhang watched in displeasure as she held onto the contract worth 300 million yuan. His heart ached as though he had cut off a piece of flesh. He really did not expect that despite her young age, this woman was so good at psychological warfare. Jin Wan was so young. He didn't say more. He put away his briefcase and turned to leave. His expression was very ugly. When he left the private room and saw that his wife was still outside, he immediately put on a smiling face and didn't dare to show his anger at all. In the private room, Jin Wan gently flicked her fingers on the contract. She curved her lips and casually tossed the contract to Xiaoba. Keep it. The next day, a roll of surveillance footage from the KTV near MN Group was sent to the computers of various media outlets. Overnight, all the unrelated rumors about Jin Wan and CEO Zhang were deleted. Not to mention photos, not even a single insulting word was left. Jin Wan was very busy these days. Although the scandal last time didn't affect her much, the news of her returning to the country with MN Group, which belonged to the business circle, spread like wildfire and was widely spread. In fact, many rich people at home and abroad didn't participate in things like the Forbes ranking, nor would they disclose the amount of assets under their names. Relatively speaking, low-key people were still in the minority. When she was in London, Mr. Zand helped her manage everything. In order to help the development and reputation of MN Group, he took the initiative to report the strength of MN Group in all aspects. So Jin Wan was selected as one of the world's entrepreneurs by Forbes. This kind of ranking was actually just a gimmick. She didn't care about it, and even felt it was a bit of a burden. However, as the #1 female entrepreneur under the age of 25, High Cities TV stations and reporters took turns to wait outside MN Group just to interview her. Later, to avoid being pestered like this, Xiaoba asked the TV station to arrange an interview for her. Jin Wan personally went to the TV station to record the interview. After the interview, it caused a huge response, causing Jin Wan's reputation to soar. Every day, she was pestered by the media to no end. After enduring for more than 10 days, finally, the media's popularity gradually decreased, and her life gradually returned to normal. She no longer had to be chased by reporters and even followed to her home every day. After being busy for so many days, the weekend was finally approaching. All of a sudden, a special invitation was sent to Jean Wan's desk. In the afternoon, when Jean Wan returned to her office, she saw the envelope on the table. She opened it and took a look. It was a golden invitation. "What's this?" she asked, opening it. Xiaoba said, "It's from the Ling Xiao Group. It said that it's their old chairman, Mr. Xiao Xinjuan's 50th birthday. They'll invite all the major public figures and celebrities in the country to attend the birthday banquet. The Xiao family has always had business dealings with the major companies in High City, so they plan to hold the birthday banquet in High City. They've even specially invited you." Special invitation? Jean Wan didn't remember that she had any contact with the people of Ling Xiao Group, nor did she have any contact with the Xiao family. If she did have any contact with them, it was probably when she was locked up in the mountain villa by Xiao Li 3 years ago. But then she went to England and had never contacted China, let alone had any contact with them. Even if he invited all the big shots and public figures of Sea City to attend the birthday banquet, it would only be an invitation. How could it be a special invitation? Jean Wan opened the invitation and took a look at it. It was indeed written with the word special invitation. By the way, the person who just sent the invitation said that CEO Xiao intends to invite you to the birthday banquet as his female companion. If you have any questions, you can call CEO Xiao. Xiaoba pointed to a black corner that was pressed by a stack of documents. "That's CEO Xiao's business card. I almost forgot about it." Jean Wan pulled out the black business card from under the document and saw Xiao Li's name on it. Although Ling Xiao Group and the Xiao family's old house were not in High City, they were located in Lin City, which was very close to High City. For many years, Ling Xiao Group had been a heavyweight in the business circle. It was said that Mr. Xiao Xinjuan, the chairman of Ling Xiao Group, had connections with the 4 big families of High City when he was young. Jean Wan forgot where she had heard it. Mr. Xiao Xinjuan had a very good relationship with her father Ji Hongwen when he was young, but as long as she could remember, she had never seen this man surnamed Xiao appear in the Ji family. Later, she vaguely heard some things about Ji Hongwen when he was young. At that time, she was still young and didn't pay much attention to it, so she didn't have much impression of this Xiao family. Later, when she learned about the Xiao family, she only knew that the current leader of the Xiao family was the 3rd generation of the Communist Party. The whole family had been working for the big leaders of the country since decades ago, and even some uncles and nephews of the Xiao family held high military ranks in the country's military. It was a family that spanned the 3 realms of business, politics, and military, and was almost as famous as the Mo family in the country. In the early years, the Mo family also had these relationships with the leaders of the government. Later, as the Mo family withdrew from the disputes of the government and saw through the advantages and the relative dangers of being involved in the military and politics, the Mo family began to be very low-key and focused on business. In order to avoid arousing suspicion in the country, the Mo family moved the foundation of the family business to the United States. It could be said that they had made a lot of preparations and did not completely take root in the country. Therefore, although the Mo family now seemed to have an invincible position in the business circle, in fact, for many seniors in the domestic business circle, the Mo family and the Xiao family were unusual existences and ancestors who could never be provoked. Holding the business card, Jean Wan recalled the days when she was trapped in the villa on the mountain 3 years ago. Although nothing happened afterward, she had never figured out why Xiao Li left her in the villa for so many days without doing anything to her or hurting her. What did he mean by that? There must be something wrong, but later, Xiao Li didn't do anything at all, except for the uproar caused by him in High City 2 years ago, in order to steal Shi Nianzhi from Qin sighting. She never heard anything about him again. In fact, Xiao Li had always been a very low-key and mysterious person. The Xiao family was so prosperous in the country, and the Ling Xiao Group was also an unshakable enterprise in the Chinese world. But he rarely showed up in person. She felt it was strange 3 years ago, and now this invitation letter came even more inexplicably. Did she provoke the Xiao family? No, He specially invited her to be his female companion? What was his plan? Instead of stealing a woman from Chin's sighting, he invited her to be his female companion. Chapter 473. 2 days later on Sunday, Jinwon got up early, took a shower at home, and prepared for the birthday party in the evening. Tonight, not only was she the president of MN Group, but she was also the female companion of President Xiao of Ling Xiao Group. Therefore, she picked out a red dress that she liked to wear after going to England, put on a more suitable dress, and went out. When she arrived at the appointed place, she saw a stretch car parked in the distance. Obviously, Xiao Li had been here for a while, and had been waiting for her outside. Jinwon went over and knocked on the window. When the window rolled down, the man inside took a sideways glance at her. Seeing Jinwon in a red dress and smiling, he raised his eyebrows. "Miss Ji, I haven't seen you for 3 years. You've become more and more beautiful." Xiao Li got out of the car. Dressed in a well-ironed suit, he was still as arrogant as before. When he saw Jinwon's coat, he said with a smile, "I just invited you to my father's birthday party. Although the room is air-conditioned, it's still summer, so it won't be too cold. Why are you wearing a coat?" "It's a dress I chose at the last minute. My shoulders are too exposed, so it's not suitable for this occasion. I'll look more conservative and dignified with a coat, so as not to embarrass you, CEO Xiao." The others saw that the man and the woman seemed to be smiling and talking to each other, but only Xiao Li and Jinwon could feel that there was not much warmth in each other's eyes. Instead, they seemed to be sizing each other up and down. Xiao Li didn't say more, and casually opened the door behind him. "Please, Miss Ji." Jinwon didn't get in the car. She just glanced at the car, and then turned her eyes to Xiao Li in a suit. "Although I'm here, I have nothing to say. After all, your father, Mr. Xiao, is a well-known elder in High City. I should go to celebrate his birthday, but before I go to the birthday party, I still have to ask, why do you want me to be your female companion?" Xiao Li glanced at her again, and his cold eyes fell on her eyes. "Have you ever wondered why I took you away, didn't touch you at all, and asked Imo Jingxian to take you back?" "Jinwon, no." Xiao Li. He casually put one hand on the car door, and his fingers casually tapped on the car door. He looked at her face and said, "You are really open-minded." Jinwon smiled disapprovingly. "Although I did suspect it, why would I deliberately think about this kind of thing? There are a lot of lunatics in this world, and there are also a lot of perverts. If I had to think of a reason for every single person with a mental problem, I would probably die of exhaustion long ago." Xiao Li smiled coldly. "Then don't ask. If you have the guts, get in the car. If not, drive your own car. It's not a problem for me to drive myself, but I'm afraid that President Xiao must have been tortured quite a bit by Miss Shi over the past few years. He seems rather cold and distant, no longer as gentlemanly as he was 3 years ago." Jinwon smiled, her eyes slightly curved. "How is it? In the end, your rabbit still didn't obediently enter your cage. Are you very angry?" As she wished, Xiao Li smiled coldly at her, but his smile made her feel as if she had fallen into an ice cave. "Little girl, if you weren't related to me, your blood would have been spilled on the spot. How dare you poke me with words? Who gave you the guts to do so? Is it Imo Jingxian? As far as I know, haven't you two been divorced for a long time?" Jinwon didn't answer this question, as if the Imo Jingxian he mentioned had nothing to do with her. She just glanced at her car that had just parked not far away. "I'll drive myself. I don't want to bother CEO Xiao. I'll attend the birthday party, but I'd better forget about being your female companion. I don't want to be the female companion of a man who emits cold air. I'm afraid I'll freeze to death before I get there. I'm not related to you. I don't need to make myself suffer." Seeing her turn to leave his car, Xiao Li frowned and turned to look at her. "Come back." Jinwon stopped and turned to look at him. "CEO Xiao, can you change your attitude? Is this the attitude you should have toward your female companion?" Xiao Li opened the car door again. "Get in." Jinwon didn't move, but tilted her head and looked at him as if sizing him up. "Miss Ji, please get in the car." He glanced at her coldly again and said, "Please." Tut, it seemed that she had to go tonight. What kind of birthday party was it? Why did she, who had nothing to do with the Xiao family, have to go? Even a person like Xiao Li could compromise for once? Jinwan turned and walked back. Before getting in the car, she glanced at the man beside her. Thank you, CEO Xiao. Sorry to trouble you, but I want to say that you can call me CEO Ji or Jinwan. I'm not a little girl. Don't call me that. If you don't know me, you might think I've adopted a god brother. Hearing the word brother, Xiao Li suddenly said meaningfully, Really? Then one day in the future, you may be surprised. Jinwan had already sat in the car. She didn't hear him clearly just now, so she poked her head out to look at him. What do you mean by surprised? Xiao Li didn't get it. He sneered and slammed the door shut with a bang. Fortunately, Jinwan stepped back quickly. Otherwise, her head would have been smashed by the door. The Xiao family's birthday party was held on a luxury cruise ship. Although Jinwan had been in the upper class since she was a child, she rarely attended such an extravagant party. After getting out of the car, she saw the huge cruise ship parked near Hai City's Binhai Bay. Jinwan commented, Very classy. Xiao Li stretched out his arm to her and said, Of course. How dare I invite Miss Ji to an ordinary party? Jinwan glanced at his arm. Even if I'm your female companion, you don't have to hold my hand and go in. Xiao Li, didn't you tell me to be gentlemanly to you? Just be gentlemanly in attitude. You'd better keep your distance. After all, we don't know each other that well. With that, Jinwan took out her invitation from her bag and walked inside. First, she needed to get in the car with the invitation and ID card, and then take a special car to the Bay Pier. The car drove straight from the pier to the cruise ship. Looking at the size of the cruise ship, Jinwan sighed at the Xiao family's extravagance. The car smoothly arrived at the cruise ship's parking lot. Jinwan and Xiao Li got out of the car. After all, as his female companion, even if she didn't have to hold his arm, she had to walk closer to him. Xiao Li was one of the hosts tonight. After getting on the cruise ship, she didn't need to take out her invitation. She just needed to follow Xiao Li to enter the banquet hall. Many people had gathered in the luxurious banquet hall, and it was very lively. Chapter 474. Until her gaze landed on Emo Jingxian, who had unknowingly arrived at the scene. Jinwan turned her face and looked at Xiao Li expressionlessly. Is it too late for me to leave now? Why? He's just your ex-husband. Will he eat you? Do you know what it means to avoid arousing suspicion? Jinwan's face was cold, and her voice was full of displeasure. If you don't say it, if he doesn't say it, if I don't say it, who will know that you used to be Mrs. Mo? Even if there are a few people here who know it, they don't dare to say it without seeing Emo Jingxian's attitude. Besides, no media will come here today. Don't worry. You've invited more than half of the big shots in the mainstream business circle in Hai City. How many people do you think will know? Although it's a small number, it's not a small number. Jinwan had found that some people were looking at her with curiosity and scrutiny. Tonight's banquet was different from the provincial exhibitions she attended. It was purely a place for businessmen, so they were not so cautious about some rules. But since she had come, it was not good for her to leave. Jinwan didn't say anything more but said, I was going to drive when I came here, so I'm still wearing flat shoes, which seems impolite in this kind of banquet. I'll go to the locker room to change my shoes. I'll be back in a minute. Xiao Li called a waiter and asked him to take Jinwan to the locker room. After arriving at the locker room, Jinwan went in to rest and changed into a pair of shoes. When she got up, she took a few steps in the locker room. Although the shoes looked good, they were new. She had never worn them since she tried them on when she bought them. Now, after a few steps, she found that the back of the shoes was slightly rubbing against her feet. Jinwan turned to open the door and called the waiter outside. Help me find 2 band-aids. Thank you. The waiter nodded. Seeing someone else was going to the locker room to change, Jinwan went out and waited outside. About 10 minutes later, the waiter came back with the band-aids. She took them and pushed open the door of the locker room. She had just sat down on the chair and was about to take off her shoes when she suddenly felt something wet under her butt. She stood up abruptly, only to see that someone had poured a little ketchup on the chair. Although it was not much, it almost rubbed on her dress. It couldn't be an accident or a coincidence that there was ketchup in such a place. It seemed that someone had deliberately come in during the 10 minutes she was out. Although her dress was red, there was ketchup on the back. From afar, it looked like menstrual blood. It was very unsightly. Jean Wan stood there for a moment before turning to open the door and take a look outside. She saw Ji Mengran standing in the crowd of the banquet hall, holding Sheng Yihan's arm and chatting with others with a smile. She then glanced at the French fries on the long table and the ketchup on the plate. She pondered for a moment and called the waiter over, asking for a pair of scissors and several small golden pins. About 15 minutes later, Jean Wan put on the shoes that no longer rubbed her feet and came out. She was still radiant and unaffected. In the distance, Ji Mengran glanced in the direction of the locker room from time to time. She saw that Jean Wan's red dress had been rolled up to her waist and decorated with several small golden pins. Not only did it successfully cover the ketchup on her dress, but it also turned the single-layered dress into a double-layered fluffy skirt. The skirt was only about 2 centimeters above her knees, and her fair, straight, long legs were exposed. Wearing a matching pair of high heels, Jean Wan instantly changed from an elegant lady in a long dress to a slightly pretty and sexy beauty in a short skirt. Those small golden pins seemed to be a special design and didn't look out of place at all. When the people near the locker room suddenly saw Jean Wan come out like this, many men couldn't help glancing in her direction. Jean Wan had taken off her coat, and the sexy but not too revealing red dress exposed her fair and seductive shoulders, collarbone, and long legs. Seeing this scene, Ji Mengran immediately looked away, as if nothing had happened. However, she was secretly unhappy in her heart. Why was Jean Wan as ostentatious as before she got married? Even Sheng Yihan could feel the change in Jean Wan now. The point was that she was more ostentatious than before. The 24-year-old Jean Wan was different from the first socialite of high city in her teens, before she got married. At that time, Jean Wan was a proud peacock, but now Jean Wan was a combination of sexiness and maturity, unabashedly showing off all her beauty and appearing more unrestrained than before. And this attracted more men's attention. After walking through the crowd, Jean Wan didn't plan to look for Xiao Li. Anyway, when she came out just now, she saw Xiao Li go to the back, probably to meet the star of tonight, his father, Mr. Xiao. Seeing Jean Wan didn't have a male companion, some men who had met or cooperated with Jean Wan some time ago came up to greet her. From time to time, a man struck up a conversation and asked, "Cog, did you come alone? Don't you have a male companion?" Jean Wan smiled and didn't answer. She just took a glass of red wine handed to her by the man, clinked glasses with him, took a sip and said with a smile, "I have a male companion, but I guess this place is too big, and we got separated. Is CEOG's male companion your boyfriend or someone else? You were alone the last time I saw you. I wonder if CEOG has a boyfriend or is he married?" The man then said politely, "I don't know if it's too abrupt to ask this." "No, it's not abrupt." Jean Wan took another sip of red wine and saw a familiar slender black figure who had just received a glass of wine not far away. She smiled and said to the men next to her, "I'm married, but my ex-husband died." Under the shocked gazes of the group, she gently shook the red wine glass in her hand and continued in a voice that could be heard by the people around her. 3 years ago, after attending his funeral, I went straight to England. Haha, COG really likes to joke. COG, you can't make such a joke. These people all thought she was joking. Chapter 475. Jean Wan walked through the crowd. Because of the ketchup, her short skirt had to be changed. Although it was no longer dignified and elegant, it was beautiful with her pretty eyes and brows. Over the years, she had always known how to show her beauty to the extreme. The more someone wanted to play tricks on her, the more confident and elegant she would be. Ji Mengran watched from the side. As soon as Jean Wan appeared in the crowd, almost all the men's eyes turned to her. Jean Wan didn't walk with her male companion, so everyone scrambled to be her companion. However, while the women in the field saw such an enviable Jean Wan, the men saw a noble and languid woman who just passed by a group of men, said hello to them with a smile, and completely ignored the admiration in their eyes. She wore a red skirt, her skin was fair, and her face was as beautiful as peach and plum, but her eyes were as cold as frost, and no one could really approach her. Xiao Li thought that when he came out again, he would see a little woman who was lost and looking for him everywhere. But when he came out, he saw Jinwan smiling confidently with everyone. He thoughtfully looked at the woman, who seemed to have grown a lot in the past 3 years. After staring at her for a moment, he walked over and said, "My dear female companion, how do you feel after strolling here alone for a long time?" "Not much. I almost forgot your existence, CEO Xiao." Jinwan turned back and smiled at him. Obviously, she didn't care whether he was there or not. Xiao Li didn't talk nonsense with her and said seriously, "My father wants to see you. Come with me." CEO Xiao's father? Mr. Xiao Zhenjuan, who was celebrating his 50th birthday today. He wanted to see her. Jinwan did not speak, but her eyes blinked twice, clearly asking why. "He invited Miss Ji here so blatantly. He can't kidnap you to kill and dismember you. Besides, there are surveillance cameras all around. You don't need to worry about your safety." Jinwan thought for a moment. Of course, she didn't worry about her safety. She just didn't know what the Xiao family meant. Xiao Li was hard to figure out. What kind of person was his father? "Please." Xiao Li made a very gentlemanly gesture. Jinwan didn't say anything more. Since the chairman of Ling Xiao Group invited her, she had no reason to refuse. After all, this was a large domestic company. No matter how powerful MN Group was, it couldn't easily compete with Ling Xiao Group. When he and Xiao Li were about to walk in the direction he said, they suddenly passed by a quiet place where people were drinking wine. Xiao Li stopped, looked back at the person beside him and said with a smile, "COMO, it's such a beautiful night. Have a good time." Jinwan turned around to see the man's handsome face that caused one's hair to stand on end. The black shirt wrapped around the man's slender and straight legs, and the perfect lines of his body. It was so exquisite that there was not a single crease on it, causing countless women to be captivated. He raised his eyelids, glanced at them indifferently, and finally rested his eyes on Jinwan's face. His eyes were as calm as ever, as if Jinwan had never said he was dead. His handsome face was also calm, but his eyes were deep. He stood there indifferently and said in a low and clear voice, "It doesn't matter whether I'm happy or not, but I'm afraid the person CEO Xiao is taking her to see won't make her very happy." Jinwan raised her eyebrows. Was Emo Jingxian a fortune teller? How did he know that Xiao Li was taking her to see someone? Why did she feel that he seemed to know why Xiao Li invited her here tonight? Just like 3 years ago, Emo Jingxian clearly knew Xiao Li's background very well. Seeing Jinwan pondering, Xiao Li just smiled and looked back at her. "Miss Ji, don't tell me you don't dare to go in. It's just to see my father." Jinwan didn't speak, nor did she look at the two men again, but walked in. She didn't stop until she reached the door of the lounge. "Although I'm not a narcissistic person, I don't think Mr. Xiao will be so senile as to want to see me and ask me to be his daughter-in-law. Will he?" Jinwan suddenly blurted out after thinking a lot about Emo Jingxian's words. Xiao Li didn't expect that she would walk so fast just now. As soon as he walked behind her, he heard her words and sneered coldly. "Even if he's really senile, I'm afraid I won't marry you." That's true. After all, CEO Xiao has been pursuing Miss Shi for so many years. It can be seen how stubborn you are about this rabbit that you haven't got yet. It's just an excuse that you said you'd catch another rabbit. You're not interested in other women at all. Jinwan gave him a meaningful look. Hearing her mention Shiniange, the smile on Xiao Li's face was not so sincere. He looked at her with a fake smile. "I advise you not to meddle in other people's business." "I'm not meddling in other people's business. I just like to poke at other people's sore spots." Jinwan winked at him with a smile. Xiao Li squinted at her, and suddenly said indifferently before opening the door, "Even if I'm willing to marry you, I'm afraid I won't allow it in ethics. You're really thinking too highly of yourself." Jinwan took another look at him. What did this have to do with ethics? The door had been pushed open. When she turned her eyes again, she saw that the lounge was quiet. Only a few staff members were accompanying Mr. Xiao Zhenjuan inside. There were a lot of bouquets in the lounge, which should be all kinds of birthday flowers sent in advance by the people who came to celebrate his birthday. Hearing the sound of the door, old Mr. Xiao Zhenjuan suddenly turned his eyes. Although the 50-year-old man was already half a century old, he was handsome. Judging from his temperament and figure, he seemed to be in his 40s. It could also be seen that although old Mr. Xiao Zhenjuan was old, he should often exercise and pay attention to health. Although he was about the same age as her father Ji Hongwen, his health was obviously better. "You're here." "Hello, Mr. Xiao, I'm Jin Wan." Mr. Xiao looked at her for a moment, then at Jin Wan's dress, and suddenly smiled. "The design is good. Did you change it yourself?" Jin Wan didn't hide it and said frankly, "I accidentally dirted my dress in the fitting room just now, so I changed the hemline temporarily. I hope this kind of careless behavior is not too unsightly in front of you, Mr. Xiao." "How could that be? Miss Ji is young and beautiful. You are calm when you encounter problems. From the moment you stepped onto this cruise ship, I have been paying attention to you. I can see that Miss Ji is a very outstanding girl," Xiao Zhenjuan said as he narrowed his eyes to look at her, as if he was looking at someone else through her. Because of his words, the polite smile on Jin Wan's face gradually faded. Chapter 476. It wasn't until Jin Wan saw the surveillance screens of the banquet hall above the lounge that she realized why he said he had been watching her. So she had been watched since she came in? Seeing Jin Wan didn't look so good, Mr. Xiao Zhenjuan said, "Miss Ji, don't get me wrong. My son rarely brings a female companion to the banquet. Because you are his female companion, I paid too much attention to you." Hearing this reason, Jin Wan's expression softened. "Oh, is that so?" Although it sounded normal for an old father to pay attention to his son's female companion, Jin Wan clearly remembered that the person who invited her was not only Xiao Li, but also Mr. Xiao Zhenjuan. Besides, Xiao Li was obviously just joking with her, and had never been really interested in her. Since he was not interested in her, he wouldn't let his father misunderstand her, let alone let her come in to see his father. So what was the reason? She was afraid it was not so simple. She didn't speak out her doubts, but just looked at Mr. Xiao Zhenjuan with a smile. "Mr. Xiao, since you pay so much attention to CEO Zhao's female companion, it seems that you want CEO Xiao to get married and start a family as soon as possible." With that, she turned her eyes to Xiao Li. "CEO Xiao is over 30, isn't he? He hasn't gotten married yet. It's really worrying for him to be single. I know a lot of rich ladies in High City. Do you need me to introduce some to you?" She suddenly changed the topic to him. Xiao Li gave her a warning look. "Thank you, but I don't need it." Jin Wan gave a faint smile, and was about to say something, when Mr. Xiao Zhenjuan suddenly said with a smile, "Miss Ji, it's true that you know a lot of rich ladies in High City. After all, you are the eldest daughter of the Ji family, born and raised in High City. In my opinion, your plan is really good. When you have time, introduce a few more girls to my son, so that he won't be so stubborn to marry a crooked tree, which doesn't belong to him at all." Xiao Li's face darkened. "Old Xiao, what's the difference between getting married and not getting married? You sound as if you've been very quiet since you got married. In the end, you changed a lot after more than 20 years, didn't you? It's rare for me to see it with my own eyes, so I advise you to restrain yourself. Don't use my marriage for everything." Mr. Xiao Zhenjuan immediately glanced at him coldly, but Xiao Li didn't look at him. His words clearly indicated that he didn't overdo it. Jin Wan felt that her IQ had dropped to 0 the moment she entered this room. He couldn't understand the conversation between the father and son at all. But seeing that the two of them were arguing with each other, as an outsider, she simply didn't participate. She turned to look at the expensive birthday flowers placed around her, as well as all kinds of evergreen trees and other potted plants. "Miss Ji likes flowers." Mr. Xiao Zhenjuan's voice suddenly said to her, "Take whichever you like. Flowers are not suitable for an old man like me. It's more suitable for young girls like you. If you like it, just take it." "No, I just didn't want to disturb your chat with CEO Xiao, so I just looked around casually," Jin Wan said politely. Seeing her so distant and polite, Mr. Xiao Zhenjuan looked at her for a while and smiled. It's our fault. We completely regarded Miss Ji as one of our own, and quarreled with you in front of you. We are like this at home, and don't give in to each other. Our home is so quiet as if we have no relatives. It's rare for us to get together, and we always discuss the company's affairs or quarrel over his marriage. Haha, I'm really sorry that you've seen this kind of family affair. Jinwan didn't understand why Mr. Xiao, who was rumored to be mysterious and could never be offended in the business circle, would say so much to her. And it wasn't because she was the president of MN Group. Although he sounded polite, she felt that he seemed to have something else in his words. But he didn't say it clearly. It doesn't matter. I've always let things go in one ear and out the other. I can't remember anything, and I won't tell others about these things. Jinwan smiled faintly, and her eyes were calm. Mr. Xiao Zhenjuan looked at her for a while and then said, Today is my 50th birthday. Although it's very lively, I haven't had a close friend to talk to for many years. Miss Ji, I like you very much. When the birthday party is over, would you like to stay for dinner with me? Mr. Xiao, you're too polite. Our MN group has never interacted with your group before. It's an honor to be invited today. Tonight's banquet is so luxurious, and there are so many people here. I guess the banquet won't end until midnight. My stomach isn't very good, and it's not suitable for me to eat at night, so I'd better forget about staying for dinner. If we have the opportunity to cooperate with your group, I'll definitely make time to have a good meal with Chairman Xiao and President Xiao. But I don't eat much, and I'm not a good drinker, so please excuse me. Jinwan said as she picked up her cell phone and looked at the time. It's getting late. Mr. Xiao is the star of tonight's banquet. Why don't you go out to celebrate with everyone? Seeing Jinwan's refusal was so obvious, Mr. Xiao Zhenjuan looked at her and said with a smile, Okay, we'll definitely have a chance to cooperate with MN Group in the near future. We still have a long way to go. When Xiao Li finally came out of the lounge, he saw that Jinwan looked as usual. Although she was suspicious, she didn't seem to want to ask anything. He looked at her. Don't you have any questions? Jinwan paused and turned to carefully observe the expression on Xiao Li's face. What are you looking at? Xiao Li seemed to feel uncomfortable being stared at by her, and glanced at her with cold eyebrows. I'm thinking maybe I misunderstood things just now, Jinwan said lightly. I don't think your father is in a hurry to find a wife for you, nor does he want to force me to marry you. Xiao Li, nonsense. He just wants to find you a stepmother, doesn't he? Xiao Li. Jinwan raised her hand and touched her face with a distressed expression. I admit that I'm slightly good-looking, but I don't think I've reached the point where I can win over both young and old. Your father wants to send me flowers, invite me to dinner, and even tell me that he needs a confidant to chat with. Does he want to marry me and make me your stepmother? Xiao Li. Jinwan saw that Xiao Li's face was almost green as if he wanted to say something but couldn't. She looked at him with a bright smile and asked, Hey CEO Xiao, do you lack maternal love? Chapter 477. Although Jinwan made it sound easy, after leaving the break room, what she really thought about was not this. Mo Jingxian would never do meaningless things, much less speak meaningless nonsense. There must be something wrong with what he asked Xiao Li just now. That Mr. Xiao Zhenjuan was very polite to her, and seemed to treat her very well. He seemed to want to get close to her, which contradicted what Mo Jingxian said about making her unhappy. Why would an old man who was very kind to her make her unhappy? She had never met Mr. Xiao Zhenjuan before, and there was no conflict between them. Why would he make her unhappy? After thinking about it, she thought of what Xiao Li said about ethics and morality. Her eyelids twitched, and she seemed to have thought of something. But she walked quickly back to the banquet hall with a straight face, and didn't say a word to Xiao Li again. She was probably thinking too much. When Mr. Xiao came out of the lounge, the banquet hall of the cruise ship was very lively. Mr. Xiao didn't come to see Jinwan again. Although Xiao Li was by her side as her male companion, he didn't participate in the various celebrations at the banquet. Whenever a man came to strike up a conversation with her, he would drive him away with his eyes, and didn't give Jinwan any chance to chat with other men. Although this made Jinwan feel relaxed, She couldn't relax because of the idea that suddenly popped up in her mind. She must be thinking too much. In the middle of the banquet, Jean Wan went to the champagne tower alone to pick up a glass of champagne and looked back at the people who were slowly dancing on the dance floor because of the music in the hall. She picked up another glass of champagne and planned to bring one for Xiao Lui, who had no wine in his hand. However, as soon as she turned around with 2 glasses of champagne in her hand, the lights on the cruise ship suddenly flickered and finally became bright and dark, and from time to time there was a sizzling sound as if there was an electric short circuit. Then the security guards on the scene sensed that something was wrong. Just as they were about to call everyone to stop walking back and forth, the lights in the banquet hall suddenly went out completely, and the surroundings became dark. Even if there was no danger, and it might just be a problem with the lighting, there were still a lot of ladies and men who didn't know how to keep a low profile and were afraid of death, screaming in fear. A group of people fumbled around in the dark, looking for the direction of the exit. The voices of the security guards who were guiding the exit were drowned out by the screams. From time to time, someone raised the flashlight on his cell phone and shone it around, making it even more difficult to see clearly in the darkness. Jean Wan hurriedly put down the glass and was about to follow the crowd out, but someone rushed too fast behind her. She couldn't see anything in front of her in the dark, but there should be more than one person. Those people suddenly bumped into a champagne tower 2 or 3 meters high, piled up of countless champagne glasses. Countless goblets fell, and in an instant, all the glasses smashed down on Jean Wan, who was standing closest to the champagne tower. There was a crash and the sound of glasses falling to the ground. Soaked by the wine, Jean Wan was about to dodge to the side to avoid being hurt more, but someone next to her bumped into her again. She was wearing high heels, and the ground under her feet was full of wine and glass fragments. It was slippery, and she couldn't stand firm. As soon as she was bumped, she suddenly fell to the ground. Hiss! She sucked in a breath of cold air in pain. At the moment when her arms and calves were pierced by the glass fragments of various glasses on the ground, Jean Wan wondered if she would be trampled to death by the panicked footsteps of a group of people. But the lights came back on at this moment. At the moment when the lights suddenly came on, everyone was stunned and didn't know whether it was just a temporary blackout or a cruise ship scare like in the movies. When Xiao Lui suddenly passed through the crowd and was about to rescue Jean Wan before she was seen by others, unexpectedly, someone was one step ahead of him, pushed through the crowd, wrapped a suit jacket around her soaked body, and then decisively picked up the injured Jean Wan by the waist. With a stern and cold face, he told the people around to get lost and carried Jean Wan out quickly. When the group of people came to their senses, they only saw Immerse Group's COG, who was dripping wet and in a sorry state, wrapped in a black men's suit, almost covering half of her body. They couldn't see her face at this time. Only her white and slender arms and calves were covered in blood. Only then did someone notice that even the high champagne tower had collapsed. There were glass fragments of wine glasses all over the ground, and there was a lot of blood on the ground. It seemed that COG had just fallen there, and happened to fall directly on the glass fragments on the ground. It seemed that she was seriously injured. There were even people who recovered from their momentary panic and said in astonishment, "Am I seeing things?" The person who carried COG out just now was COMO. The scene was still in a mess. Mr. Xiao Zhenjuan suddenly came over quickly. Seeing the blood on the ground, he turned to look outside and said coldly, "Why is there so much blood? Send someone to have a look. If there's anything you need, send someone to help immediately. I hope this child is not seriously injured. She's such a good girl." The security guards kept explaining to the crowd that just now, there was a problem with the power lines because of the voltage instability on the cruise, but the power was restored in 2 minutes. They didn't expect that such a thing would happen in just 2 minutes. Mr. Xiao Zhenjuan suddenly glared at Xiao Lui. "I asked you to take care of her, but why did you take care of her under the champagne tower?" With that, he turned around and ordered, "Ask someone to get the surveillance video of the power outage for 2 minutes. Isn't there a night vision camera here? I'd like to see who pushed him down when he was fine." At the back of the crowd, Sheng Yihan suddenly looked at Ji Mingran beside him. Ji Mingran was secretly pleased to see that Jin Wan was injured. Suddenly being stared at by Sheng Yihan, she said, "It wasn't me. I was standing with you just now. When everyone was running around, it's normal for someone to bump into the champagne tower. And then someone else. How could I have predicted the power outage? How could I control the power lines on the cruise? It's Jin Wan's bad luck. It has nothing to do with me." Sheng Yihan glanced at her coldly again before retracting his gaze. He then glanced at the furious chairman of Ling Xiao Group. Ji Mengran said again, "Don't you think Mr. Xiao cares about Jin Wan very much? Do you think she's having an affair with Mr. Xiao? After all, everyone secretly says that she slept all the way to the company." Sheng Yihan pulled his arm out of Ji Mengran's hand in annoyance and said coldly, "Shut up. Didn't you spread this rumor first?" Chapter 478. Jin Wan only hurt her left little arm and left calf. She didn't mind being drenched in champagne or having wine glasses poured on her. But her arms were stabbed by the glass shards when she fell to the ground. She didn't know how deep the wounds were, but now her arms and legs were hurting from time to time. Even though she now knew who had carried her out of the banquet hall, she couldn't refuse or show off. She really needed to go to the hospital immediately. If there was a deep wound soaked in champagne and bacteria on the ground, it would be easy for her to get infected. But she really didn't expect that Mo Jingxian, who was so far away from her, and the banquet hall was so big, could accurately find her position in the darkness and rush of people, and suddenly come to her side in just 2 minutes. The main thing was that it was so dark that she couldn't even see the person standing closest to her, let alone walk in the exact direction in the crowd. Jin Wan was held by the man the whole time. He didn't speak, nor did she, but she could feel from his tight embrace that he carried her so quickly to the parking lot of the cruise ship, as effortlessly as before. She also weighed 90 kilograms, but every time, this man seemed to be holding a ball of cotton. Was she so light? When they arrived at the nearest hospital to Binhai Bay Road, Mo Jingxian sent her to the trauma department to disinfect and bandage her wounds. Sitting in the consulting room, a middle-aged female doctor took her arm and said while disinfecting it, "Girls nowadays look delicate and tender, but they are obviously more resistant to damage than older people like us. How can you be so calm after being stabbed by glass shards? Doesn't it hurt? Look, there are still some glass shards in the wound." Jin Wan looked at her arm. After wiping away the blood, she saw that there were only some small scratches and 2 deeper wounds that bled more. Although it was painful, she had been holding it in. However, after the doctor clicked his tongue and said a few words, she only felt the pain increase. She didn't speak. Seeing that the doctor was still nagging, she resisted the urge to roll her eyes and said, "Doctor, please hurry up." "Hey, you're so hurt, but you still want me to hurry up? Don't I have to disinfect them one by one? The wound on your leg hasn't been treated yet. Why are you in such a hurry? Was that your boyfriend or your husband? I heard that when he carried you out of the car in front of the hospital, he didn't even lock the car and directly sent you in. He must be very distressed that you're injured like this, right? Be careful in the future. Don't go to parties or parties. Stay away from these dangerous things." Jin Wan, "Auntie Doctor, you really know how to nag. But your boyfriend is really handsome. I've never seen a young man as good-looking as him in so many years in the hospital. Miss, you're also very good-looking. You two are a good match. Doctor, as soon as possible, okay?" Jin Wan tried to maintain a smile. The doctor clicked his tongue again, put her arm down, then lifted her skirt, put her leg on the bed in the consulting room, and continued to treat the wound on her leg. At this moment, the door to the consultation room opened. Mo Jingxian brought in a black men's shirt and placed it by the bed. It was obvious that the shirt belonged to him. For him to be able to fetch it so quickly, he must have some spare clothes in his car. After disinfecting the wound, change the wet clothes on your body. I've asked someone to buy clothes for you. The seaside is far from the city, so you may have to wait for a while. Wear this first. Jin Wan took a look at him and wanted to say thank you, but when she saw the man's cold eyes, it was clear that anything she said could ignite a fire. So she thought for a while and didn't say anything. However, when the doctor took out a glass fragment deep into the flesh above her knee, she couldn't help but let out a hiss of pain. Immerse walked over. His words were not to comfort her, or to ask the doctor to be gentle. Instead, he glanced at the wound on her leg and said mildly, "It's just a superficial wound, yet it hurts so much. Just now, it was only the champagne tower that fell. If it was the ceiling of the banquet hall that weighs tens of kilograms, would you still be standing there foolishly?" Jinwon didn't raise her eyes. "I was wearing high-heeled shoes, and the ground was slippery and wet. I couldn't stand still at all. Do you think I didn't want to hide? And people were running around in a hurry, and I couldn't move at all, okay? Then you don't have to wear these high-heeled shoes anymore." "How can I not wear them? I'm not a rich lady in a big family. Every day in the company and on various occasions, if I wear flat shoes with a dress, or wear flat shoes with my usual business attire, it will be too inappropriate." At this time, the middle-aged female doctor was disinfecting the wound where she had just taken out the glass fragment. Jinwon trembled in pain, and her face turned pale. Immerse still didn't have any intention of comforting her. He said calmly, "Disinfect her wound a few more times and let it hurt a little longer." "Jinwon." The man threw the shirt on the bedside to her hand and said coldly, "If it doesn't hurt, you won't remember." "All right." The middle-aged female doctor readily agreed, and then pressed the sterilized cotton on Jinwon's knee again. Jinwon trembled in pain, and tried hard not to scream. With a pale face, she raised her eyes and glared at the man who was standing by the bed and watching calmly, scolding angrily. "Como, it's improper for men and women to touch each other. My skirt has been lifted up, and my legs are lying on the bed. If you're a gentleman, shouldn't you turn around and leave now?" The man glanced at her indifferently. "You've slept with me countless times. Why are you afraid to see my leg?" "Jinwon." At this time, the middle-aged female doctor said to Jinwon with sterilized cotton and medical tweezers in her hand, "Alas, don't flirt with me. I know you two love each other. I lost my husband when I was young, and have been alone for so many years. I'm most afraid to see young people who love each other." Jinwon sneered and didn't go to see the doctor, but continued to look at Immerse coldly, and said in a very cold tone, "Doctor, please don't mind me. I also lost my husband when I was young." The middle-aged female doctor's hand trembled. She looked at Jinwon in surprise, and then turned to look at Immerse in astonishment. "Oh, an aunt of my age may not understand you young people. Bear with it. The wound here will still hurt a little. I'll try to be gentle." Chapter 479. After the wound was cleaned, the doctor personally helped Jinwon to the bathroom next door to wipe the alcohol off her body, helped her change her clothes, and asked someone to borrow a hairdryer from the VIP ward upstairs for Jinwon to dry her hair. When Jinwon came out in the black shirt, the doctor covered her mouth and said with a smile as she helped her into the consulting room, "When I watched TV series, I often saw that the heroine looked very beautiful in a man's shirt. I didn't expect that there was such a beautiful girl like you in reality. This shirt looks so beautiful on you. Hey, is that man really not your boyfriend? I said I lost my husband early. How could any man dare to marry me? Boyfriend? Not to mention, I've been single for more than 3 years," Jinwon said casually. The doctor helped her sit down on the bed and checked her wound. "Girl, when did you get married? You don't look old now." 20. Jinwon smiled. "Now I'm 24. "Oh, your husband has been dead for 3 years, hasn't he?" "That's right. It's been 3 years." Jinwon's voice was calm and not guilty at all. The doctor hesitated, and turned to look at the man, who had been waiting for them in the consulting room. Immerse stood in front of the consulting room, looking out of the window. Hearing their conversation, he did not look back. The doctor coughed and said, "That's a pity. You're still so young. It's time to get over the pain of the past. You've done your best to guard your ex-husband for 3 years. It's time to consider finding a new man to fall in love with and marry. People can't be immersed in pain all their lives." Jinwon nodded solemnly. "Yes, it's time to find a new man to fall in love with and marry." The man in front of the window turned back. "Are you clean?" Jinwon ignored him. And the doctor said with a smile, "She's clean, and her hair has been blow-dried. It's just that she didn't wash thoroughly enough in the hospital. She still smells of alcohol. I think she'll have to take a good bath when she goes back." Mo Jingshan came over and saw that Jin Wan was wearing his shirt, which was just long enough to cover her thighs. As long as she walked normally, nothing else would be exposed. The sleeves of her shirt were rolled up high, and her arms and calves were wrapped in white gauze. Other than that, Jin Wan did not appear to be injured anywhere else. She was in good condition. "Do I need to go to the hospital to change my dressing?" "There's no need. Her injury isn't particularly serious. After disinfecting and applying medicine, try to get someone to help her bathe in the next few days. Don't let the wound get wet. She'll be fine in 2 days. It's okay. These are all very simple superficial wounds. Just be careful not to leave a scar. Otherwise, such a beautiful girl with such good skin won't look good if there's a scar." Mo Jingshan didn't listen to the doctor's nagging anymore. He withdrew his gaze and raised his hand to hold Jin Wan's uninjured arm to support her, asking, "Can you walk?" Right now, Jin Wan was wearing a pair of flat slippers that the doctor had given her. "I can walk," Jin Wan said as she tried to pull her hand out of his. Mo Jingshan acted as if he did not see or feel the struggle in her hands, and directly supported her to walk out. Under the doctor's eager and enthusiastic gaze, Jin Wan didn't say anything. After walking out of the consulting room, she pulled her hand back. "Thank you, CEO Mo. I don't have to trouble you. I can walk by myself." Mo Jingshan just glanced at her indifferently and didn't let go of her. He helped her into the elevator and still didn't let go of her. Seeing him holding her arm with one hand and pressing the elevator button with the other, Jin Wan took advantage of the fact that there was no one else in the elevator and shook her hand. "Let go." Mo Jingshan looked back at her coldly. "If you don't want to be carried out by me, behave yourself." "CEO Mo, thank you very much for your help today. If you hadn't helped me put on my clothes in time in the banquet hall, I would have been seen by others. Thank you for sending me to the hospital, but I'm fine now. The doctor said it's just a superficial wound. I don't need to be held, let alone held, okay?" Mo Jingshan nodded and said, "CEO Mo, I'm very grateful to you for helping me today. I don't need you to help me or hold me, okay?" The elevator stopped on the first floor. Mo Jingshan didn't respond but took her out. Jin Wan was wearing slippers, but they didn't belong to her, so she couldn't walk very well. She stumbled a little and followed him out. Because there were too many doctors, patients, and family members on the first floor, she tried hard not to make a sound, lest she attracted others' attention. She was taken to his car parked outside the main entrance of the hospital. Jin Wan looked at the black ghost in front of her, which was the same as it was 3 years ago, remembered the scene when he carried her out of the car, and immediately took a step back. Mo Jingshan glanced at her indifferently because of her movement. "I can take a taxi back. I don't need to trouble COMO to take such a small wound." Jin Wan didn't look at him, and still tried to withdraw her hand. "Jin Wan, you should know my temper. Get in the car, okay?" The man's hand had turned to hold her wrist, and he didn't intend to let go. He didn't hold her tightly and wouldn't hurt her, but she just couldn't pull her hand out. Jin Wan's eyes turned cold for a moment. "I don't understand." Mo Jingshan looked at her and froze for a moment. Then he didn't say more, opened the car door, and signaled her to get in the car and stop dawdling. Jin Wan didn't want to have anything to do with him. She could understand their previous encounters as inevitable in the mall. Today, when he carried her out in public, her mind was a little blank, and she couldn't refuse him. In that situation, she wouldn't be so ungrateful. Jin Wan didn't know what was good for her, but now she seemed to have no reason to get in his car. She was silent for a moment and then said, "When I saw that Bugatti last time, I thought you had changed to a new car. After all, it's been several years. I didn't expect that this ghost is still here." Mo Jingshan knew that she was changing the subject and attention, so he didn't answer her. Seeing that she really didn't intend to get in the car, he pressed her in with the strength of his hand. As soon as Jin Wan sat in the passenger seat and was about to get out, the man pressed her seat belt that had just been pulled halfway, lowered his head, looked at her cold and resistant face, and said almost commandingly, "Sit tight." The author's words. 2 days in a row, I really did it. Tears streamed down my old face. In fact, there were a lot of foreshadowing in the updates these 2 days. I hope you don't just look at the places where the male lead appears. Some foreshadowing should be read. Today, I took some time to carefully read the recent readers' comments. And don't worry, I'll write about the plot you want to see in the future. Chapter 480. Jin-won had to raise her face to look at him because of his oppressive posture, and because he could kiss her if he lowered his head a little. She froze and didn't move. This distance was too close. So close that she could clearly feel the man's slightly hot breath brushing against her cheek. Then she heard a low, crisp sound, which was the sound of him fastening the seat belt in front of her. She stepped back a little, leaned against the seat, and kept a distance from him. It was not a compromise, but Mo Jingshan clearly didn't intend to give her a chance to leave alone. No matter how she resisted now, it would be useless, and the result would be the same. He didn't do anything to her. When he saw her sit down obediently, he got up and closed the door. Sitting in the car, Jin-won saw that her bag was still in his car. When he carried her out of the banquet hall, she remembered that he had taken her bag with him. When she got out of the car, she forgot to take her bag. If she had really planned to take a taxi back alone, she wouldn't have brought her cell phone with her, let alone the fare. She really couldn't go back. At the thought of the embarrassment of having no money or cell phone, if she had successfully escaped, Jin-won picked up the bag and put it on her lap, which could cover the length of the shirt that barely covered her thighs. If she sat here without a bag to cover her, too much would be exposed. Mo Jingshan opened the door of the driver's seat. After getting in the car, he glanced at Jin-won, who had been sitting next to him with a straight face. "The clothes I bought for you are in the back seat. Do you want to change now or take them back?" "There's no need to change now. I'll take them back." "Thank you, CEO Mo, for buying them for me," Jin-won said flatly. The man didn't say anything more, and drove the car away from the hospital. Half an hour later, Jin-won saw that he was driving in the direction of the apartment where she lived now, so she said, "If it's convenient, CEO Mo, please send me back to the company. I don't plan to go home tonight." "You want to go back to the company dressed like this? It's so late, and there's no one in the company. Besides, aren't there new clothes in the back? I'll just wear them outside," Jin-won said flatly. "It's already so late. If I go home now, it won't be convenient for me to take a shower or do anything. There's a 7 a.m. meeting tomorrow morning, and it's a meeting that I have to attend. You're the CEO of the company, so you should know how important this kind of meeting is. I only have some minor injuries. If I stay at home to rest, it'll be too late." With that, Jin-won said indifferently, "Even if I go home in this state, I won't be able to get to the company before 7 o'clock tomorrow. I might as well go back to the company now. Anyway, there's a break room in my office. I'll take a shower, change my clothes, and have a good night's rest. I don't have to get up early tomorrow morning and go to the meeting without walking too far. I'm not someone who can easily ask for leave. It's better not to be absent from important meetings. What do you think, CEO Mo?" The man didn't speak, but turned the car onto another road, the road leading to the MN Group in the west of the city. At the gate of the MN Group's office building, Mo Jingshan saw that several floors of the building were still lit up, and the security guards were also guarding outside the door. It was quite safe. He handed her the clothes in the back seat of the car. "Put them on. Don't go in until you're dressed." Jin-won didn't reply. After taking the clothes, she picked up a long, loose dress and put it on. When Mo Jingshan saw that the dress was over her knees, he opened the central lock in the car and allowed her to get out. The moment Jin-won opened the door, she looked back at him. "Thank you, CEO Mo. Be careful when you drive at night. Don't get killed in another car accident." Mo Jingshan glanced at her disapprovingly. "I haven't seen you for years, but your mouth has become more and more vicious." Jin-won gave him a bright smile, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. "Haven't I been like this before? Do you think I haven't taken off my mask of gentleness and understanding?" With that, she didn't say anything more. She got out of the car, took her bag, and walked into the company without looking back. After entering the company, the security guards were surprised that CEO G would come to the company so late. When they saw the gauze on her arms and legs, two security guards hurriedly ran out to ask, CEO G, what happened? Why are you injured? It's nothing. I accidentally fell down at a banquet. It's just a skin injury. I'll be fine in 2 days. Jinwon walked to the elevator and didn't explain much. Then why did you come to the company? I was too lazy to go home. I'm going to sleep in the office break room for the night. Before entering the elevator, she thought for a while. Order takeout for me, noodles or rice noodles. The security guards nodded blankly. When Jinwon entered the elevator and the elevator door closed, the security guards hurried to find the number for takeout. When she reached the top floor of the company, Jinwon turned on the main control light on this floor, and the darkness instantly turned bright. She walked into the office, took off her slippers, threw her bag on the sofa in the office barefoot, and hurriedly pushed the door into the break room. She took off all her clothes, went in, and carefully wiped the rest of her body with a towel except for her wounds. Then she washed her hair separately. After making sure the smell of alcohol was gone, she came out and found comfortable clothes in the wardrobe to change into. After finishing all this, the security guards brought over the takeout he had just ordered for her. It was a bowl of beef noodles. Jinwon took it in and began to eat. She enjoyed it very much, as if nothing had happened today. It wasn't until the cell phone in her bag vibrated that she took out her cell phone and saw that there were many missed calls, several of which were from Xiao Li. She picked up the phone, and there came a man's voice. How's the wound? Did you go to the hospital to bandage it? You took so long to answer the phone. If you didn't answer it, I'm afraid I would have thought you were taken away by your ex-husband and locked up. Jinwon. CEO Zhao's imagination is too good. How many people in this world are as perverted as you who always like to lock people up? The man on the other side of the phone sneered coldly. Do you think I'm locking you up? You have good food and drinks, and you don't lack anything. You even have someone to serve you. Even when you go swimming, someone will hand you a bath towel. It's more comfortable than a vacation. Most people can only beg for such treatment. Then I should thank CEO Xiao for letting me spend a week happily being kidnapped? Chapter 481. Xiao Li snorted and didn't continue this topic but said, My father flew into a rage when you fell and injured yourself at the birthday party today. I haven't seen him so angry for many years. Did Mo Jingshan take you to the hospital to bandage your wounds? Yes, they've been disinfected and applied medicine. It's no big deal. Jinwon's voice was cold and indifferent. Thank you for your concern, CEO Xiao. Speaking of concern, Miss Ji, if you have time, you can come to the Xiao family. CEO Xiao, I'm actually not the type to get to the bottom of things, but I really don't know you and old Mr. Xiao very well. Your sudden concern makes me very nervous. Today, you invited all the famous people in High City, and I've also received an invitation. That's still acceptable, but inviting me to see old Mr. Xiao is already inappropriate. Now you're inviting me to your home for a meal. Don't tell me you really want me to be your stepmother? Xiao Li sneered. You're quite thoughtful. Otherwise, what else can I think? Is it just because your father likes me so much and wants to take me in as his goddaughter? I don't think so. After all, we haven't even met before. How can he be so familiar with me? Your Ling Xiao group is a big business, and there are many people who want to be relatives with your family. What do you think I should think when someone I've never met suddenly shows such great interest in me? Xiao Li didn't say much but said, All right, Miss Ji, go to bed early. Jinwon casually responded, without waiting for the other party to hang up. She hung up and tossed her phone onto the bed. She then lowered her eyes to look at the darkened screen of her phone, thinking about what happened at the banquet today. The way Mr. Xiao looked at her at that time. Jinwon pondered for a moment, and suddenly wanted to call Ji Hongwen, but she glanced at the time and gave up. It was so late. Her father must have gone to bed. The government's project to rebuild the stadium had begun. All the plans and personnel, including financial and material resources, were ready, and they just needed to finalize the date of construction. Jinwon didn't go to the government recently, In fact, as long as the higher-ups didn't ask her to be there in person, she basically wouldn't show up. Although this was a very important project issued by the government, she would try to let others go as much as possible. Xiaoba brought a group of people to inspect the construction site of the old stadium. They were gone for several hours, and only returned in the afternoon, exhausted and sweaty. He handed her a camera filled with electronic photos. Jin Wan inserted the camera's memory card into the computer and checked the photos they had taken. After Xiaoba went back to her office to take a shower and rest for half an hour, she came back to say, "By the way, boss, I met the leaders of the city at the construction site today. They said that since the project has been finalized by the province and the city, we don't have to go to the city for the stadium for the time being. We can choose a place to discuss the stadium with the person in charge of the construction bureau and other partners." Then the leaders of the construction bureau said that their bureau was too far from the stadium and planned to move all the meetings about the stadium project to Shine Group. "That is to say, boss, if you continue to follow the progress of this project, you should go to the office building of Shine Group with the people of the construction bureau in the future." Jin Wan stared at the photos on the screen without any pause and said calmly, "I see." Seeing that Jin Wan didn't show any dissatisfaction, Xiaoba stared at her expression for a while and didn't see any uneasiness on her face. It made sense. This was what the government and the construction bureau said, and the matter had been settled. Even if Jin Wan had any dissatisfaction or objection, she could only vent her anger in her own company, and there was no change in the result. "Well, boss, the construction bureau said that there will be another meeting this Friday. Shall we go to Shine at the appointed time?" "Okay." Jin Wan still looked at the computer screen. Xiaoba didn't dare to disturb her anymore and walked away lightly. It wasn't until the office door was closed that Jin Wan looked at the photos of the construction site on the screen, raised her hands to her temples, and let out a long breath as she rubbed and massaged her temples. The headquarters of the Shine Group was the former MO Group. It was still in the original location, but it was upgraded and rebuilt. It used to be very tall, and now it was even taller. Moreover, it was a building that incorporated many modern high-tech designs. If the people from the construction bureau wanted to take the opportunity to visit the Shine Group, they could just say that it was their own reason. Why did they have to involve this project meeting and let everyone follow them to visit the Shine Group's building? She had long heard that the person in charge of the construction bureau this time was a very jumpy person. Sure enough, this kind of thing could be done in the construction bureau. Why the hell did they put it in Shine Group? A good stadium project became a good opportunity for various cooperative agencies and companies to take turns to cling to Shine Group. She really should thank the person in charge of the construction bureau for his good intentions. 2 days later, Friday. Office building of Shine Group in High City. Jin Wan got out of the car and looked at the magnificent and towering building in front of her. It had been a long time since she came here. After returning to China, she rarely passed by this main street and this square, so she had never seen the difference between today's Shine Group and the MO Corporation 3 years ago. Now it seemed that although it was still in the same place, the difference was really big. Xiaoba followed Jin Wan out of the car. At this time, Deputy Director Chen, the person in charge of the construction bureau, also arrived. When he saw Jin Wan, he came over and shook hands with her with a smile. "CEO G is really punctual. I heard that several roads in MN Group are being repaired, causing serious traffic jams in the West City District. But you also arrived so early." Jin Wan nodded at him, raised her hand symbolically, and shook hands with him, and then took her hand back. "Fortunately, the traffic jam was not very serious just now. This is the first time I come to Shine Group for a meeting. How dare I be late?" "Oh, is this also the first time COG has come to Shine?" Deputy Director Chen smiled. Jin Wan didn't look at him again, nor did she say much. She just looked inside. "Let's go in." Okay, Deputy Director Chen said, and asked other people to follow him. Chapter 482. After a few polite greetings, they went straight into the elevator. Deputy Director Chen was really curious about Shine Group. Even a slightly more high-tech elevator was a novelty to him, and he kept asking Shenmu about this and that. Fortunately, Shenmu was gentle and patient, and he was better at dealing with people than many ordinary assistants. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been trusted and put in an important position by Mo Jingshan's side for so many years. After talking for a while, they arrived at the floor of the conference room. Deputy Director Chen walked in front, and Jin Wan walked unhurriedly behind him. When passing by an office, she noticed that there were many employees she had never seen before. But there were also some old employees she had passed here 3 years ago. She turned her face away, lest it arouse others' curiosity and gossip. At this time, Shenmu took the time to come back. Standing by Jin Wan's side, he noticed that Jin Wan was wearing very casual close-fitting jeans and a long-sleeved translucent white chiffon shirt. Her shoulder-length hair was slightly curled inwards in a very professional way, and she looked so calm as if this was not the old site of Mo Corporation, but a place where she came for a temporary meeting. Won't it be hot to wear trousers in this weather? Seeing that Jin Wan didn't mean to take the initiative to talk to him, Shenmu walked beside her and asked with a low smile. Jin Wan took a look at him and said flatly, "Special Assistant Shen, it seems that your observation skills are a bit off. Do I have to explain to you what I wear?" The corner of Shenmu's mouth twitched. "I'm just concerned about you. Special Assistant Shen, don't worry about me too much. It's my first time to come to your company. It's more appropriate for you to introduce the environment of this company to me." Hearing the word first time, Shenmu understood what Jin Wan meant. It seemed that she really didn't want to revisit this old place. "Special Assistant Shen, our boss suffered some minor injuries on his arms and legs not long ago. Although he's fine now, there are still some red marks, which don't look good if they're exposed. After the marks disappear in a few days, he can wear clothes normally," Xiaoba whispered beside him. Shenmu had just nodded to Xiaoba when Jin Wan reached back and took the documents from Xiaoba's arms, saying mildly, "You guys talk outside. I'll go in for the meeting." Knowing that Jin Wan was blaming her for talking too much, Xiaoba hurriedly followed Jin Wan's footsteps with an uneasy expression and followed her into the conference room. When everyone had taken their seats, Jin Wan went in and greeted them politely. She was about to sit down when the sound of a man's footsteps suddenly rang outside the conference room, which was particularly clear in the large space of the conference room that had suddenly fallen silent. Jin Wan turned around and saw that Mo Jingshan had already entered. He was a handsome man. His clear facial features perfectly matched the cold face he had when he had carried her into the hospital that day. He was wearing a pair of black trousers on the lower half of his body and a pure white shirt. The buttons on the shirt were all buttoned up tightly, giving off the aura of a cold and noble elite. He was not like his usual self with a few buttons unbuttoned outside the company, looking half sexy and half abstinent. Although the meeting was arranged by the construction bureau, it was held in Shine Group after all. With a smile on his lips, he glanced at everyone and said in a very magnetic voice, "Deputy Director Chen, how did you think of holding the meeting in Shine Group? I didn't have time to greet you just now. Please forgive me for my poor hospitality." "Not at all. CEO Mo is very busy. It's very kind of you to take the time to hold a meeting with us. We chose this place because it is closer to the stadium of our project site, and Shine Group has a large space and more spare conference rooms. It's more convenient for you to arrange a conference room for us." Deputy Director Chen got up and stepped forward to shake hands with him. After another round of pleasantries, Mo Jingshan withdrew his hand and went straight to the meeting. Jin Wan didn't move, but Deputy Director Chen hurriedly gave up the seat in front of him and invited Mo Jingshan to take a seat several times. Then Deputy Director Chen asked everyone to move back and finally vacate the seat next to Jin Wan. He sat down on Jin Wan's right side. "It's closer here, and it's more convenient for us to talk," Deputy Director Chen said as he moved closer to Jin Wan. Jin Wan smiled. When she turned her eyes, she saw that the man was sitting in the leather chair in front of the conference table. His slender legs wrapped in pressed black trousers were elegantly crossed, and his slender and well-defined fingers were holding the documents that his secretary had just handed to him. The huge high-definition screen in front of him had already shown the design drawings of all directions of the stadium. In order to make the screen clearer, the lights in the conference room were not turned on, and only the pictures on the blue screen kept rolling. In the blue light, the man's extremely handsome face was blurred by the light, but he looked unusually cold. Glancing at Jin-won, who was being tugged at by Deputy Director Chen's sleeve, and talking in a low voice, Mo Jingshan's thin and cold lips curled up slightly, and he smiled coldly, but his voice was so low that no one could hear his emotions. Deputy Director Chen, are you here for a meeting, or just want to talk to CEO Ji alone? Could it be that Deputy Director Chen has forgotten that all the agencies and partners are still sitting here? As soon as Mo Jingshan finished speaking, Deputy Director Chen's hand that had been tugging at Jin-won's sleeve trembled, and he hurriedly let go of her. Jin-won also withdrew her arm at the right time, and calmly continued to look at the pictures on the big screen, and the staff who were standing in front of them, and analyzing the various project drawings of the stadium. Seeing that Deputy Director Chen didn't dare to continue to look at Jin-won, nor did he dare to tug at her sleeve and talk to her in a low voice, Mo Jingshan threw the documents in his hand on the conference table with his slender fingers, signaling for the meeting to continue. Some of the people present had been invited to Mr. Zhao's birthday party a few days ago, and had seen Mo Jingshan carrying the injured Jin-won out. Some of them had seen Mo Jingshan, who had always kept a distance from women, teaching Jin-won how to play darts when they went to the seaside resort some time ago. Some of them had noticed Mo Jingshan, who had always kept a distance from women, teaching Jin-won how to play darts. Some of them had noticed Mo Jingshan and CEO Ji of MN Group, but no one dared to gossip about it. At this moment, seeing Mo Jingshan's cold attitude, they felt that the relationship between CEO Ji and CEO Mo was really not ordinary. The conference room was silent, and only the staff standing in front of the screen were talking. There were a lot of people in the conference room, so the air conditioning was turned on. Most of the people present were men in shirts, suits, and trousers. When they all felt a little cold, Jin-won also felt cold. Just as she inadvertently touched her arm through the long-sleeved chiffon shirt, the man sitting at the head of the conference table didn't seem to look at her. But his voice suddenly rang coldly. Shen Mu, go and turn up the temperature of the air conditioning. Chapter 483. The meeting continued and lasted for more than 2 hours, from 2 o'clock to 4 o'clock in the afternoon. When Jin-won inadvertently raised her hand and rubbed the back of her neck again, Mo Jingshan said coldly, the meeting is adjourned. Take a break first. We'll continue in an hour. Everyone looked at each other in surprise. From the very beginning, when he learned that he was coming to Shine for a meeting, he had been mentally prepared. It was said that CEO Mo was a workaholic, especially after taking over Shine Group. It was rare for him to be so humane. Usually, important meetings would last for several hours, and they would not be interrupted, let alone given such a long break. Hearing Mo Jingshan's words, Shenmu opened the door of the conference room, but everyone at the conference table still thought they had heard it wrong. Even Deputy Director Chen didn't dare to get up because of Mo Jingshan's cold eyes from time to time. CEO Mo, are you really going to take a break? If you take a break now, I'm afraid the meeting won't end until 6 o'clock. The secretary standing next to him asked in a low voice. Mo Jingshan didn't speak but got up and left, cold and quiet. Seeing that CEO Mo had left, it was obvious that the meeting was going to be intermission. Everyone instantly breathed a sigh of relief. Those who should get up and go to the bathroom went to the bathroom. Those who should drink water drank water. Those who should make phone calls made phone calls. And those who should rub their eyes and sit in their original seats rested. Sure enough, people who weren't employees of Shine Group didn't know what the working atmosphere here was like. This was the first time they had a meeting in Mo Jingshan's territory, and they immediately felt the pressure. Even Deputy Director Chen wondered if he had chosen the wrong place. Mo Jingshan was not a person who could be easily offended. When they met in the city, even the provincial and municipal leaders had to give in to him. But CEO Mo was polite to them. Now in the Shine Group, Not to mention that he was the leader of the construction bureau. Even the other partners and people from the government departments sitting here felt that they didn't even dare to breathe loudly in the meeting. After making sure that Mo Jingxian had left, Deputy Director Chen put on a smile and looked at Jinwan, who was about to go out. CEO Ji, you must be very tired after a 2-hour meeting. There's nothing to do after an hour's rest. Would you like to go downstairs and have a coffee with me? Jinwan had stood up and turned to look at Deputy Director Chen, who was in his 40s and wearing a pair of silver-rimmed glasses. She calmly avoided his hand that was about to hold her and said with a smile, "A few days ago, when I drove past the first middle school, I saw a very beautiful girl. I heard people say that her father is the deputy director of the construction bureau. Is she your daughter?" Deputy Director Chen's expression froze. "The person who picked her up outside the school was your wife, right? I really envy you for having such a perfect family, Deputy Director Chen. Not only is your wife beautiful and virtuous, but she also takes your child to school every day. But I heard people say that they rarely see the child's father." Jinwan smiled. "If she's really your daughter, I advise you to spend more time with your family and pick up your children from school. No matter how important your work is, it's not as important as your family, don't you think?" Jinwan spoke very tactfully, and there was a smile in her eyes. Deputy Director Chen withdrew his hand and nodded awkwardly. "Yes, yes." Jinwan glanced at him again. Her voice was soft and light, as if she was speaking carelessly, but she slapped his face word by word. "I think your wife is very beautiful. She has such a big daughter, but she still looks so young at this age. In my opinion, a woman at her age has a special charm, which young women like us can't compare with. Each has its own merits. When a man is successful in his career, don't always look at young girls. It's better to look at the person next to you." Finally understanding Jinwan's warning, Deputy Director Chen felt a little embarrassed and didn't say anything more. But Jinwan had already walked out of the conference room. As soon as she went out, Xiaoba leaned over and said beside her, "Boss, did you notice that before CEO Mo asked someone to adjust the air conditioner, he first saw you start to rub your arms because you were cold, and then he stopped the meeting because he saw you were so tired that you were rubbing your neck?" Jinwan glanced at him calmly. "Are you paying attention to the wrong place? Why did I ask you to come here?" Xiaoba pursed her lips and handed the meeting materials to her. "I was sitting at the back just now and sorted out the meeting materials. The contents of the meeting for the past 2 hours have also been recorded. I didn't miss anything." As she spoke, she said happily, "I just learned that we assistants and subordinates need to go through a simple security check before entering the conference room of the Shine Group, but Special Assistant Shun let me in without checking me. Boss, do we have special treatment here?" Jinwan knocked Xiaoba on the head with the meeting materials she had just received. "Special my ass." Xiaoba shrank his neck, took the meeting materials aggrievedly, and muttered in a low voice, "But Special Assistant Shen didn't treat us as outsiders just now." Jinwan just walked out as if she didn't hear anything. The break was only an hour, and she had to continue the meeting later. Jinwan was about to go downstairs and find a milk tea shop to rest with Xiaoba, when Xiaoba received a call from her boyfriend, saying that he was nearby and that he would treat Xiaoba to a French restaurant in the evening. Knowing that Xiaoba could take a break, he asked her to sit in a nearby park for a while. Jinwan couldn't bear to disappoint these two young lovers, who were so busy with work that they rarely got together, so she gave Xiaoba a few hours off. She didn't need to come to the meeting later. She would record the contents of the meeting and take it back to the company tomorrow for them to sort out. Xiaoba ran off with a blissful expression. Jinwan had no interest in drinking milk tea alone. She took a stack of documents and casually found an empty parlor on this floor to rest. There was a black leather sofa in the parlor, as well as a water dispenser and disposable cups. She poured herself a glass of warm water and then sat on the sofa, rubbing her neck from time to time. Because she was often busy with work when she was in the UK, she couldn't relax after returning to China. Now, as long as she worked or sat for too long, her neck and shoulders would be a little sore. Chapter 484. Jinwon managed to open her eyes and set an alarm on her cell phone to wake her up in 45 minutes. Then she simply leaned against the sofa and let herself sleep for a while. It was too comfortable to fall asleep. Her original posture of leaning against the back of the sofa gradually changed to a posture of lying on the sofa. Then she curled her arms under her head like this. When she was picked up by the waist, she just frowned unconsciously, rubbed her face in his arms, and continued to sleep. Emo Jingshin lowered his eyes and watched as the woman in his arms rubbed her face against his chest out of habit. His calm expression was gradually mixed with a hint of warmth. When he carried her out of the reception room, there were Shine Group employees passing by in the hallway. However, they spontaneously walked forward with their noses lowered. No one dared to cast a glance at the woman in CEO Mo's arms. Even if they wanted to discuss curiously, they had to wait until CEO Mo was far away before they dared to do so. However, they did not dare to make any noise. When they reached the top floor of the company, the woman was still sleeping. Emo Jingshin carried her to the office. As soon as he pushed the door open, Jinwon in his arms seemed to finally notice something wrong. She wanted to turn over, but she couldn't. Her closed eyes didn't open, but her eyelashes moved slightly. Her eyes were still closed, and her body was tighter than when she had just fallen asleep. The man carried the woman who had woken up into the office. Feeling that her body was getting stiffer and stiffer, he spat out 3 cold and low words from his thin lips. Go back to sleep. Even when he put her on the sofa, Jinwon just kept her flat sleeping position, lying motionless, and didn't open her eyes. Seeing her stiff appearance, Emo Jingshin smiled, adjusted the air conditioning in the office to the right temperature, took off his suit jacket, and covered her with it. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 10 minutes, half an hour. Jinwon lay motionless on the sofa. During this long time, she could hear the man's footsteps towards the desk and the rustling of the documents as he worked. Everything was quiet. Knowing that she was pretending to be asleep, he didn't expose her. When the break of the meeting was over, the secretary knocked on the door. When she came in, she saw Jinwon lying on the sofa with Siomo's clothes covering her body. She didn't dare to ask anything or even glance at her, pretending that there was only COMO in the office, saying, COMO, the people of the construction bureau are waiting in the conference room. Jinwon didn't hear Emo Jingshin's words. She only heard the man's footsteps passing by the sofa and then walking out of the office. When she was sure that he had left, she slowly opened her eyes, slowly sat up, and looked at the CEO Mo, which was very different from 3 years ago. She sat quietly for less than a minute, then got up and left with a calm look. The secretary had just returned to the secretary's office when she saw Jinwon come out. She hurriedly walked out. CEO Mo COG, she said. COG. Mo to you. CEO MOG Mo you too okay? I'm going back to the company. Jinwon didn't look at the secretary and went straight to the elevator. But CEO Mo is still in a meeting. If you want to go back to the company, shouldn't you tell him first? Otherwise. Jinwon stopped in front of the elevator and pressed the down button. I have nothing to do with your CEO Mo. I don't need to tell him whether I'm leaving or not. Of course, out of politeness, you can say goodbye to him for me after the meeting. But, COG? Before the secretary finished speaking, the elevator door opened on the top floor, and Jinwon walked in without looking back. Before the elevator door closed, Jinwon took a look at the secretary and said, Please make a copy of the meeting materials for the second half of today, and send them to my assistant's email tomorrow. Thank you. As soon as she finished speaking, the elevator door closed. 2 hours later, the meeting was over. The secretary had been waiting outside the conference room. Seeing Emo Jingshin come out, she hurried to greet him. Emo Jingshin glanced coldly at the secretary who suddenly came up to greet him. Is she gone? The secretary nodded. As soon as you left the office, CEOG came out. After all, this new secretary had just come to the company. Although she knew CEO Mo's work habits, she didn't know CEO Mo's private life and love life. At this time, she didn't know how to deal with this matter, so she could only say truthfully. COG didn't say anything when she left. She just asked me to make a copy of the meeting materials for the second half of the meeting to her. Hearing this, Immerse didn't say anything. The secretary hesitated for a long time, not knowing whether to say it or not. But when she thought that when COG was lying in the office just now, she seemed to be covered with CEO Mo's coat, and what she saw when she went downstairs, she couldn't help feeling a little indignant. The secretary said hesitantly, "Also, when CEOG left, I saw that the car that picked her up was not the car of MN Group, but the car of Mr. Vince, the general manager of BGY Group. And the person who picked her up was also Mr. Vince." Immerse, who was about to walk forward, suddenly stopped and took a dark look at the secretary. In an instant, the secretary felt as if she had been pierced by an ice arrow, as if there was a thorn in her back. For a moment, she wondered if she had said something wrong. Outside the window at the end of the corridor, it was already dark. High City was just beginning to light, but it was drizzling. The man stood in front of the conference room. His usual indifference was no longer there, and his cold face revealed displeasure. Immerse was silent for a long time, and then his cold and deep voice suddenly rang. How long had that car been waiting outside before she left? According to the security guard at the door, Mr. Vince's car had been waiting for more than an hour. Our company has had a lot of cooperation with BGY Group before, and we have had many contacts with Mr. Vince, so I have a deep impression of his car. And when the car door opened, I saw the person in the driver's seat, and it was indeed Mr. Vince. Immerse nodded silently, only listening, but not responding. Seeing that he didn't speak, the secretary didn't dare to say more, let alone guess what the relationship between CEO Mo and COG was. CEO Mo was a man with deep thoughts, and it was difficult to understand. Although he had been in the company for so long, he had never seen through him. It was just that her instincts told her that a cold and indifferent person like CEO Mo should have his own control over everything. He would rarely miscalculate. That CEOG should be a very special existence to CEO Mo, right? Chapter 485. Outside the car window, the light rain gradually turned into heavy rain, falling on the car and making muffled noises from time to time, making people's hearts wet. I guess I have to thank the rain. Otherwise, since the last time we parted, I don't know when you would talk to me. Mr. Vince laughed as he drove. Jean sat quietly in the car and smiled. When she left the office building of Shine Group, she was supposed to take a taxi back to the company, but she didn't expect that Mr. Vince's car was waiting for her outside. At that time, the sky was covered with dark clouds, and it was going to rain. She didn't bring an umbrella, nor did she drive her own car. At that time, it was still the rush hour, and it was difficult to get a taxi. Mr. Vince opened the door for her to get in the car, and she didn't refuse but got in. Not long after she got in the car, it began to rain. "How did you know I was here?" she asked. "Tomorrow is the weekend. I wanted to ask you out, but I was afraid that you were still angry, so I called Xiaoba just now. She said you were here, and I happened to be working nearby, so I came directly." "Have you been waiting for a long time?" Mr. Vince didn't answer, but judging from where he had parked and the other cars around, he must have been waiting for her downstairs for a long time. He had been waiting for more than a little time. 3 years, it was indeed a long time. "In fact, you don't have to hang on to me all the time." Jean curved her lips and said with a smile, "I can't deny that Mr. Vince is charming enough to attract many women, but my emotional world is already a pool of stagnant water. It's not worth it for you to waste your time on me." Mr. Vince just smiled and shook his head. "You should have heard that I don't want to marry. Now there's just a girl who I'm attracted to. I won't force her. What happened last time was just a momentary loss of control. I'm sorry. I promise I won't be so rude again." In fact, he only kissed her on the cheek that day, but obviously he had said a lot of words of self-reproach. "You don't have to apologize. I've long forgotten it. Let's move on. Don't mention it again." Hearing her words, he naturally wouldn't mention it again. "I heard that your company has been in contact with Shine Group recently. Why are you having meetings in Shine now?" As Mr. Vince spoke, he held the steering wheel with one hand, and took out an exquisite pink candy box embellished with sequins from the glove compartment in the car with the other, and handed it to her. Jinwan took a look at it, took it, and replied, "It's a document issued by the government, asking Imin and Shine to participate in the stadium reconstruction project together. The venue of the final meeting was decided by the leaders of the construction bureau. I'm just following orders. I've just returned to China, and if I want to establish a foothold in High City, I can't afford to offend anyone, so I have to listen to orders. You sound like you don't want to go to Shine Group." Jinwan fiddled with the candy box in her hand, opened it, and took a look at it. Instead of answering his question, she just asked, "What gift is this?" "My colleagues went on a business trip to Japan a few days ago and brought back all kinds of souvenirs. I only took this box of fruit candy and left it in the car. I plan to let you eat one every time you take a ride in my car. There are 100 candies inside. If you take my car 100 more times, maybe before you finish eating the candy, you'll already be mine," Mr. Vince said as he gave her a seemingly joking look. Jinwan picked up a candy from the box, peeled off the wrapper, and threw the pink heart-shaped fruit candy into her mouth. "I can't accept other gifts, but this candy looks beautiful and tastes sweet, so I'll accept it. It's impossible to put it in your car. Since you've given it to me, I'll take it away," Jinwan said, and put the candy box into her bag. Mr. Vince didn't stop her. He smiled as if he had gotten what he wanted. "It's rare for you to receive something from me. I've never heard that you like sweets before. It seems that I don't know you well enough. I don't like sweets very much, but I don't mind eating them. Everyone likes beautiful things. When I'm in a bad mood, eating one can restore half of my good mood. Why are you in a bad mood?" Jinwan was silent for a moment, looking at the rain that was getting heavier and heavier outside the car, and didn't answer. Before Xia Tian went home to give birth, she had a deep conversation with Jinwan. Xia Tian asked Jinwan if she hated Mo Jingxian very much when she got divorced. Otherwise, why would she leave him so decisively? If it weren't for the fact that Xia Tian was about to give birth, she wouldn't even have come back. Jinwan said that when she left him 3 years ago, she did hate him. True grief wasn't as heart-wrenching and suicidal as others thought. Instead, it was calmness. Even if one really had a heart-wrenching experience, one wouldn't scream it out. Once one was in so much pain that one would become numb to it. From then on, no matter how one walked down the road, they would always be alone. 3 years was enough for her heart to be strong enough, and it was enough for her to bear all the negative emotions with a calm appearance. She asked Xia Tian, "Have you ever heard of the saying, 'A smile forgets all enmity'?" What Mo Jingxian had done 3 years ago was to remove her from their marriage and seal off all her once lively feelings step by step. The most ruthless and ruthless thing he had done was to take back all the happiness he had given her with his own hands. So even if they met again 3 years later, she could smile at him and call him COMO. She could be strangers to him, and they could even sit in the same meeting room to work. He was just a man in the business world that she could not afford to offend. He was not the person who once belonged to her. There were not so many rules in life. Everyone lived in this world, and living too extreme would lose the joy of living. So she didn't choose extreme rejection, but chose to get along with him tactfully. But she still couldn't figure out why Mo Jingxian kept pressing on her after returning home. It couldn't be that she really didn't know Mo Jingxian at all. Did he just like to play cat and mouse? Even now, every time the man looked at her, his eyes seemed to have the words, "Take back the lost ground." Thinking of the scene where she was going to have a good sleep just now, she was overbearingly carried into the office by that man. He knew she was pretending to be asleep, but didn't expose her. She had to keep a stiff sleeping posture awkwardly, and now she still felt sore all over. She always felt that she had brought this upon herself. Chapter 486. When the car arrived at Jinwan's place, the rain had stopped, and the ground was covered with puddles of water. She would be covered in mud with just a few steps, and it was really inconvenient to go to the road. So Jinwan simply found a small restaurant on the night market near the apartment, and invited Mr. Vince for dinner. Although it was a very simple restaurant, the environment was clean, the ingredients were clean, and the taste was warm and simple. Xiaoba said before that you can cook and often make dinner at home. I wonder if I can have a chance to taste your cooking in the future? Mr. Vince looked at her gently. It was not the first time that he had eaten with Jean Wan. But every time, he put down the tableware early and watched her eat attentively. Jean Wan held her forehead and sighed with a smile. My cooking skills can only fool Xiaoba and the others or feed myself. It's not good at all. Don't take her words seriously. But why do I remember that Xiaoba said that your cooking is very delicious? When she was in England, she often went to your place to eat. She also said that if she hadn't found a boyfriend and had to move to another place, she would love to be by your side every day and be fed well by you. Speaking of which, Xiaoba is just an assistant. You can treat her so well. But why do you treat me like an outsider? Jean Wan picked up the glass and took a sip of water. She swallowed and said, You're right. I've been so good to Xiaoba. But she's still so talkative and says everything. It seems that I really can't be too good to her in the future. If she knows me too well, she won't even know when she betrays me. She paused and then said, But she has been working for me for a long time. We've known each other for more than 3 years. And we're as familiar as family. There's really nothing to treat me like an outsider. Then I've known you for more than 3 years, haven't I? Xiaoba can often go to your place to eat. But I can't even eat a meal? Jean Wan. Mr. Vince raised his eyebrows and looked at her with a smile. He did not press her. But he clearly had no intention of giving in. In the end, the conversation inexplicably became that Jean Wan owed him a meal. After the meal, Jean Wan prepared to go home. Mr. Vince was about to send her. But he remembered that his phone was still in the car and asked her to wait for a while. Jean Wan said no, asking him to drive back and turned into the apartment. Perhaps because of a short circuit, the streetlights in the neighborhood went out again. The road from the gate to her home was so dark that she could hardly see her fingers. The ground was covered in water. Jean Wan walked carefully in her high heels. All of a sudden, her cell phone rang. She had just dug out her phone from her bag and saw that it was a call from the company. She was about to pick it up when she suddenly smelled an unpleasant stench, and the stench of alcohol coming from behind her. She paused and her eyes widened. She quickly turned around to avoid the drunkard who was pouncing on her. The other party missed and staggered, almost falling to the ground. His mouth began to clamor. Wifey, you're finally back. Why are you hiding? To be called wifey by this short, fat, sweaty, and alcoholic man. Jean Wan shuddered and took a step back to prevent him from pouncing on her again. Wifey, come home with me. What else does that man have aside from some stinky money? How can he love you as much as I love you? Come home with me. The drunkard stared at her, speaking crazily as he pounced on her again. Jean Wan dodged again. She was about to turn and quickly returned to the entrance to call the security guard when the drunkard used all his strength to grab her hand and pull her back harshly. Jean Wan was almost thrown into his embrace by this forceful tug. With great difficulty, she moved back a little and shouted angrily, You've mistaken me for someone else. Let go of me. Don't think that I won't recognize you just because you found a rich man and are dressed so beautifully. Wifey, come home with me. Jean Wan was about to push him away harshly. However, just as she raised her foot and was about to stomp on his foot, a black shadow suddenly rushed over and punched the drunkard's face. The drunkard took several steps back and fell heavily to the ground. Jean Wan's eyes lit up. Jean Wan was startled. She turned to see that it was Mr. Vince who had rushed over and pinned the man to the ground. After punching the drunkard again, Mr. Vince stood up and grabbed Jean Wan's wrist. He asked with a serious and concerned expression, Are you all right? Jean Wan shook her head. She wanted to say that she was fine. In fact, it should not be much of a problem for her to deal with a drunkard like this. However, she did not expect Mr. Vince to suddenly rush over. Mr. Vince's expression was ugly. He was about to bring her to the security guard of the condominium to settle the score. They actually allowed such a person in. However, the drunkard who had fallen to the ground suddenly stood up and cursed, shouting, Damn it! Bitch! This old man treated you so well, yet you still ran off with a rich man. I'll kill you. As he spoke, He suddenly pulled out a fruit knife from his pocket. His eyes were bloodshot as he charged forward. By the time the two of them realized that this drunkard who had suddenly appeared was actually carrying a knife, there was already a flash of silver light. Jinwan's heart jumped fiercely as she rushed to shout, "Careful!" Mr. Vince's eyes were sharp, and his hands were nimble. He pulled Jinwan to the other side of his body, protecting her while instinctively raising his arm to avoid the drunkard's fruit knife. However, the knife ruthlessly slashed across his arm, leaving a bloody wound. The drunkard's eyes were bloodshot as he raised the knife to stab down again. At this moment, the security guards had already heard the commotion. 3 or 4 of them rushed over and pressed the drunkard onto the ground. The drunkard continued to curse, but was unable to stand up. Jinwan rushed to grab Mr. Vince's arm. She pursed her lips and said, "Using your arm to block, do you think you're an iron wall? Come home with me. I'll help you wash your wound." Mr. Vince originally wanted to say that it was only a fruit knife wound, and that it was nothing serious. However, when he heard that Jinwan actually allowed him to go to her home, the words on the tip of his tongue turned into obediently nodding his head. All right. In that instant, even if the security guards did not arrive in time, the 2 bodyguards hidden in the shadows would have rushed over. They did not expect Mr. Vince to actually turn back. On the other side, Mo Jingshan had yet to leave the office when he heard a low and apprehensive voice reporting from the phone. When Miss G just returned home, she met a crazy drunkard downstairs. Mr. Vince suffered some superficial injuries as a result. Right now, Miss G has already helped Mr. Vince back to her home. The man had yet to leave the office. His handsome face was hidden in the darkness of the rainy night. His fingers tightened around the phone. So, not only did Jinwan have dinner with that person tonight, she also brought that man who clearly had designs on her back to her place? Chapter 487. The door opened with a beep. Jinwan rushed to support the man behind her and walked in. As she walked, she quickly pressed on the wall to turn on the lights. "Come on, sit down first. I'll help you wash your wound." Mr. Vince entered the door and glanced at the place she lived in. The first thing he saw was that the living room was neat and tidy. It was not as messy and full of things as she usually said. The apartment was more than 200 square meters, but the living room was large. The decoration was simple and not complicated. There was also the faint fragrance of a woman living alone in the air, making him feel inexplicably reluctant to leave as soon as he stepped in. "Sit there first. I'll go get the first aid kit." Jinwan pointed to the sofa. "It's nothing serious. The fruit knife's sharpness can't be that serious. It's just a scratch on the surface of my skin. If it were really that deep, I would have gone to the hospital by now." Mr. Vince glanced at the sofa. There were 2 blue and white pillows by the side, like the color of the sky. The white fabric sofa was as clean as new. He sat down and looked up at the woman, who was hurriedly looking for the first aid kit. Jinwan brought the first aid kit, opened it, and rummaged through it for some simple medicine, gauze and band-aids. As she took them, she said, "Even if you don't go to the hospital, he used a lot of force with the fruit knife just now. It's not that deep, but it's definitely not shallow. Don't you know how much blood you lost in the elevator?" As she spoke, she turned around to fetch a basin of water and took out a new towel from the drawer. She sat beside him and rolled up the sleeves of his shirt that had a long cut. Then, she carefully began to wipe the blood around the wound. Seeing Jinwan's gentle and serious movements, Mr. Vince stared at her face. He watched as the little woman carefully wiped the wound clean, wiped the wound again with white gauze dipped in alcohol, and then changed the gauze to clean the wound. When the alcohol fell on the wound, Jinwan was afraid that it would hurt too much, so she carefully blew it with her mouth and turned to ask him, "Does it hurt? Bear with it." Mr. Vince stared at her face. "No." Seeing the man's eyes, Jinwan shifted her gaze away and did not speak again. After cleaning the wound, she applied medicine and bandaged it several times with gauze. Finally, after the bandaging was done, she did not sit by his side for long and got up to organize the medicine box. Her movements were swift and capable. The 24-year-old Jinwan was different from 3 years ago, but she did not give off the feeling of a young lady in her early 20s. She also had a special charm to her, and it was also her unique and indescribable charm. After tidying up everything, Jinwan returned to the bedroom to search and finally came out empty-handed. "Sorry, I don't have any clothes you can wear here. You can't change out of this shirt. Just roll up your sleeves and go back first." Mr. Vince lowered his eyes to look at the smooth bandage on his arm. "I've never heard that you've studied medicine before. How did you manage to treat and bandage wounds so well? Being ill for a long time makes one a doctor. Over the years, I've been in many situations, big and small. Some time ago, I went to a birthday party and cut my arms and legs. I was often bandaged, but I learned it after a while," Jinwan said as she lifted her legs, which were still in jeans. "Didn't you notice that I was still wearing long sleeves and trousers on such a hot day?" The wounds had not disappeared yet. The red and black patches were too unsightly, so she simply covered them up. Mr. Vince looked at her clothes and saw that her white chiffon sleeves were stained with his blood. So he pointed at them. "Sorry, I dirtied your clothes." Jinwan lowered her eyes to take a look and smiled indifferently. "It's all right. If I can wash it, I'll wash it. If I can't, I'll change. Anyway, I have a lot of clothes. I still have 2 boxes of clothes I left in High City 3 years ago. I don't need 1 or 2 more. As for you, if something like this happens in the future, don't block it with your own hands. It's just a fruit knife. If it's an axe, your arm will be broken. What if I have to take responsibility for you? I'm not crippled, but I did see blood," Mr. Vince said half jokingly, half seriously. "Can you take responsibility for me for a few more days with this small injury? In order to repay your kindness, I brought you home, disinfected and bandaged you. I've already repaid you. Don't expect me to take responsibility for you." Jinwan looked at him with a shrewd smile. "Don't expect me to take responsibility for you." Mr. Vince raised his eyebrows. This woman was really not easy to fool. He thought he could get some benefits from the injury, but in the blink of an eye, he owed her nothing. Mr. Vince sighed with a smile. "Forget it. I'm happy to lose to you." He paused and looked around the place where she lived. "After knowing you for so long, I can finally sit in your house for a while. It's really a good reward for me, let alone a fruit knife. Even if you really want me to break my arm, I'll be happy. You're already in your 30s. Can you speak properly? Don't act like a teenager who doesn't know what's good for him. If you really break your arm, I won't take responsibility, so don't stand up for me in the future. I know some self-defense skills. That kind of drunken lunatic can't hurt me." Jinwan twisted her wrist and fist. "Didn't you see Feng Ling by my side when you were in England? She taught me some. I'm very good. At that time, I saw that man pull you and almost pull you into his arms. I rushed over in a moment of desperation and didn't let you show your skills. It seems that it's my fault?" Mr. Vince raised his eyebrows. Jinwan coughed. "Forget it. It's all in the past. Since the injury is not serious, and it's all bandaged now, how will you go back? You can't drive like this, right? Shall I send you? Or call your secretary to pick you up?" Mr. Vince raised his hand and moved his arm. "It's all right. I can drive back myself." Jinwan didn't say more and tactfully asked him to leave. Neither of them were children. A grown man shouldn't stay in her house for too long. He certainly understood that. Chapter 488. Jinwan had indeed planned to move when she first returned to the country, but she had been too busy. Tonight's incident had indeed given her a wake-up call. Firstly, this place was far from the company. Secondly, the property management and security were not good enough. Anyone could sneak into the neighborhood. At that time, the drunkard had made such a big commotion that the security guards took a long time to come over. Coupled with the blackout, this was indeed not a good place to live. "I'll consider moving. There are many good places near the company. I'll take some time to choose one. You can keep your apartment." "Why keep it? It's just left there. You might as well pick a place to live." How could Jinwan not know that the so-called apartment was just bait for Mr. Vince? He had been waiting for her to take the bait. If she really moved into his apartment for convenience, it would be more convenient for him to go to her place in the future. For such an overly shrewd man, it was just like how he clearly could have avoided the knife in other ways, but he had still suffered such a stab. When a man really wanted a woman, his thoughts were actually deeper than those in those dramas and novels. We'll talk about this later. Mr. Vince, you should go. Jinwon smiled and asked him to leave again. Mr. Vince raised his eyebrows. I suddenly regret having dinner downstairs. Otherwise, I could have stayed for a while longer with the excuse of staying for dinner. Jinwon turned to the door with a smile, opened it, and then turned to look at him. For my reputation, and for your gentlemanly demeanor, Mr. Vince, please don't make things difficult for each other. I won't see you out. Mr. Vince was also a tactful person. Earlier, he had already stood up and did not sit down again. Seeing Jinwon's attitude, he walked to the door and turned to look at her. You said before that you'd treat me to dinner when you have time. Don't forget it. Jinwon nodded. Okay. Mr. Vince walked out of the door. As he waved at Jinwon, he looked at the lights in the corridor and the escalator on the side, saying, be careful. Move out as soon as possible. Jinwon raised her hand and made an okay gesture. When he entered the elevator, she waved her hand and closed the door. Seeing Mr. Vince leave Jinwon's apartment and drive away, the bodyguard picked up the phone again. Mr. Vince left Miss G's place at 8:50 p.m. Miss G didn't show up, so she probably didn't send him off. Mr. Vince's car has already left. Mo Jingshan's expression melted into the dark night. So that man went up and sat for an entire 20 minutes? He glanced at the curtain of rain, and then at the direction of Jinwon's apartment. His gaze was cold as he said coldly, within a week, get her to move out of this apartment. The bodyguard was surprised, but he didn't dare to ask more. Well, this apartment is very old and not very safe, but where should Miss G move to? Mo Jingshan's voice was calm. Yuehubei. The bodyguard was even more shocked. Yuehubei on the west side of the city was the only high-end residential area there. Although it wasn't built by Shine Group, when Yuehubei was first built, the company had specially gifted Mo Jingshan an apartment of several hundred square meters in the middle of Yuehubei. They had also gifted several smaller apartments below that apartment. The one with the best feng shui and scenery in the middle of Yuehubei was gifted to Mo Jingshan. Almost all of the good floors were given to Mo Jingshan, and they had all been luxuriously renovated. This showed their sincerity. However, after the gift, Mo Jingshan had never moved there. Everyone knew that it was a good place in the west side of the city. It was close to various office buildings and commercial streets. In the middle of it was High City's famous Yuehubei. The environment was good, and it was a secluded holy land in the bustling city. But how could he successfully get Miss G to move there? The next day, Jinwon went to the company and found some time to look at the nearby houses online. Regardless of whether it was an apartment or a normal residence, there were only 2 or 3 residential areas that were close to the company and comfortable to live in. However, the strange thing was that there were almost no houses that satisfied her satisfaction. Her first choice was Yuehubei, but it was said that Yuehubei was not only expensive, but many of the particularly good apartments had already been sold. The remaining empty apartments and residences could barely see the lake in the area. The second choice was the other 2 residential areas near Yuehubei, namely Jinmei International and Kili Residence. The better ones were the nearby European-style villas. She lived alone, and a villa was too exaggerated. There weren't many beautiful sceneries in the west side of the city. The only one was Yuehubei, which had the best reputation and was the most expensive. However, no matter how she looked, she couldn't find a place she liked. She didn't know why the apartments in the middle had been sold at a price of 70 to 80 million yuan. Although there were many rich people in High City, they wouldn't all gather in the west side of the city. There were clearly more rich people in the south, north, and east side of the city. Xiaoba saw that she was looking at houses and came over to ask, "Boss, are you moving?" Aya, are you looking at Yuehubei?" Xiaoba suddenly pointed downstairs. "I just saw Yuehubei's property management holding an event downstairs. They said that the owner of the best building in the middle asked the property management to sell it, because he has been abroad for a long time. Do you want to go take a look?" "Which is the best building?" Jinwon opened the overall map of Yuehubei. After looking around, she decided on the 3 buildings between A1 and A3. If it's one of these 3 buildings, I'll go take a look. Otherwise, there's no need. It really seems to start with the letter A. Anyway, there's nothing to do now. It's fine if you go downstairs and take a look. It was indeed time to move. Hearing this, Jinwon got up and looked out the window. Xiaoba came over and pointed in a direction not far away. Sure enough, she saw Yuehubei's people holding an event there. She went downstairs, picked up the flyer sent by the property management, and looked at it. Then she walked over and asked in confusion, "Can the upper 5 floors of Yuehubei's A1 be sold?" Yes, the owner of these 5 floors has been abroad for a long time. There's no use for the houses in the country, so they asked us to sell them on their behalf. This building happened to be in the center of the lake view that Jinwon particularly liked. She liked to live by the water, whether by the sea or by the lake. The scenery was good, the air was good, and it was close to the company. She heard that the property management here was also very good and safe. Chapter 489. He had heard from others that the apartments in Yuehubei were very difficult to buy. Even the few apartments with average scenery were very difficult to buy, and one had to go through all kinds of checkpoints and procedures to buy one. But it only took Jinwon less than 2 days to complete the real estate transfer procedures. The next night, the house belonged to her. She bought the one below the top floor of Block A1. It was 150 square meters, enough for her to live in. More importantly, the view was as good as the top floor, and the wide balcony faced the center of Yuehu Lake. Jinwon waited until the weekend to hire a moving company to help her move. Xiaoba and several of her colleagues also came to help her pack up. Mr. Vince had been abroad on a business trip for 2 days and had not returned. When Jinwon's apartment was moved, Mr. Vince finally returned. There was nothing he could do to help. "It's actually Yuehubei?" On the phone, Mr. Vince had just gotten off the plane. He called Jinwon from the airport and learned that she had moved to Yuehubei on the west side of the city. On the one hand, he was very confident about the security there, and on the other hand, he was depressed that he did not buy the apartment in Yuehubei. He had bought almost all of the apartments and residential buildings around the MN Group, except for the one in Yuehubei. When he wanted to buy it, he learned that several of the best apartments in the center of the lake had been sold. He knew that with Jinwon's character, she would definitely choose the best location with the best view of the lake. She would not choose any other location, so he gave up on Yuehubei, a place with good feng shui. He did not expect that she would move there. "Yes, I've moved here." "That's right, I've already moved here. The place I used to live in is already empty. The property management and security here are not bad. Much better than the place I used to live in. As expected, all of you were right to advise me to move. Thankfully, I've moved here. Otherwise, who knows what else would have happened in that small district. I often work overtime now, and there are quite a number of people stalking my company at night. It's indeed quite dangerous if I don't move to a safer district." Jinwon was currently in her new home. As she spoke to Mr. Vince on the phone, she pushed open the floor-to-ceiling windows and stepped onto the balcony. Under the summer breeze, she admired the most beautiful view of the Moon Lake in the West District. Her lips curved into a smile. "This scenery is really good." Mr. Vince sighed with a smile. He couldn't tell if it was fate, or if she was deliberately avoiding him. He had thought that she would live near the company, but in the end, she chose Yuehubei. The scenery there is really good, and it's also a treasure land in the western part of the city. It's good that you live comfortably there. After chatting for a while, Jinwon hung up the phone, because she had to go back to the company. After hanging up the phone, Mr. Vince's expression darkened. He picked up his cell phone and dialed another number. "Give me the phone numbers of the property manager of Yuehubei and the property manager in the western part of the city." Before calling Jinwon, he had heard that the owner of the 5 floors above Yuehubei's A1 had resold the property. It had not even been a week, and there were likely other floors in that building that had not been sold yet. It would be good to take this opportunity to buy the floor closest to Jinwon. In the end, as the general manager of BGY Group, He called the person in charge there, but the answer he received was not accurate. They only said that the owner had gone abroad in the past few days and could not be contacted. Only the floor that Miss G had bought had the owner's consent. There were other people who had inquired about the other floors, but the owner had not replied in the past few days. They could resell it, but they could not make the final decision on their own. They still had to wait for the owner of those floors to personally agree. Mr. Vince asked for the contact information of the owner, but the other party said that they could not give it to him. Not to mention Mr. Vince's status in High City. Even BGY Group was one of the top property companies in the country. It was rare for a property company to not give him face. They were so secretive when they wanted to contact the owner, and did not even dare to mention a word about it. He called other people, but the answer he received was the same. The identity of the owner of the 5 floors in Yuahu Bay could not be casually revealed. All 5 floors were under the same owner's name. Jean Wan lived on the second to last floor, which was equivalent to being surrounded by those floors. Jean Wan was usually really guarded. Why did she directly buy the apartment without even investigating who the owner was? Mr. Vince rushed all the way from the airport to the city with an ugly expression. It took him 2 days to barely find the email address of the mysterious owner. According to the property manager of Yuahu Bay, if they wanted to sell those apartments, they had to send an application to the owner's email address. They only needed to receive the other party's approval or call back. However, for the past few days, the email address had been very quiet. The owner was most likely too busy and did not have the time to care about these apartments. "I'm sorry, Mr. Vince. We're only reselling the apartment. Miss G bought it on the first day. It's likely that the owner hasn't left the country yet," so he replied very quickly and agreed. However, the owner hasn't replied yet. There's really nothing we can do. Mr. Vince took the email address given to him by the property manager and returned home to personally fill in the application. He explained the entire process in the email, and then sent the information that would allow him to purchase the apartment in full. That night, the mysterious owner finally received a reply from his email address. BGY Vince. Hello, I personally applied to purchase the apartment in Yuahu Bay, Block A1, under your name. All the letters and information have been sent. I can purchase the apartment in full in one go. I can increase the price as appropriate. Please agree. Mysterious owner. Disagree. BGY Vince. Hello. I'm purchasing the apartment in Yuahu Bay under your name in the name of High City's BGY Group. All the letters and information have been sent. I can purchase the remaining 4 floors. The price is negotiable. Please agree. Mysterious owner. Disagree. BGY Vince. The price is negotiable. You can state the price you want. You'll be leaving the country for a long time. There's no need for you to keep the apartment in High City. Since you've already sold one, why don't you sell the remaining floors to our company, or purchase them under my name? The mysterious owner did not reply. BGY Vince. I'll double the price. Mysterious owner. Disagree. At this moment the night breeze was gentle. Jean Wan sat on the balcony of her new home, leisurely drinking the lemonade she made herself, and looking at the lake scenery at night. She was completely unaware that 2 men had started an email war because of her new home. Chapter 490. A1 was a 16-story building, and the top 5 stories belonged to the mysterious owner. After Jean Wan moved here, because this place was close to the company, she didn't have to drive to the company to avoid traffic jams. Every day, she had 40 to 50 minutes to run and exercise. On the first day, she ran into a neighbor. After chatting casually for a while, she learned that she had just moved here. The neighbor immediately greeted her warmly and asked her all kinds of questions. Then, do you know who owns the top 5 stories? I don't think I've seen them before. They're really mysterious. The prices of the top 5 stories are not low. They add up to hundreds of millions of yuan. I wonder what kind of owner can buy the best floors in Yuahu Bay. Any house on those floors is 2 or 3 times more expensive than the ones below. He owns all 5 floors, but he doesn't want to move in. Previously, when we asked around, we heard that he's a private owner and not bought by a real estate company. That's why I'm even more curious. I'm not sure. It's a real estate agent. Anyway, the other party has all the necessary paperwork, and the house is brand new. It's close to where I work, so I bought it. I thought you would know. I thought you must have met the mysterious owner before buying this house. But you haven't even seen him? Jinwon curved her lips. I haven't. Didn't you say that he has left the country? He probably won't be back for a long time. Then your house must be expensive, right? I saw that you bought a house on the 15th floor with the best view of the lake. The balcony faces the moon lake. Oh right. I heard that the one on the top floor is more than 400 square meters. It has a balcony on all 4 sides, and a 360-degree view of the scenery is on that floor. Since the other party is willing to sell it, why didn't you buy the top floor? The neighbor was warm, but she was too warm and asked too many questions. Jinwon did not answer them. She only smiled. The house is too big and seems too empty. After saying that, she took the towel from behind her neck and wiped off the thin layer of sweat that had formed from running. She smiled politely and ran away, no longer chatting idly. After running, she went upstairs to take a shower and got ready for work. When she took the elevator, she looked at the numbers on the top 5 floors and recalled how quickly and smoothly she bought this house on impulse. She just didn't have time and was in a hurry to buy a suitable one. She didn't have time to pick and choose a house. Anyway, the owner hadn't been here for a long time. Everything about the house met her satisfaction, so she bought it happily. However, she didn't expect the owner to be so mysterious. Even the neighbors who had lived here for a year or two didn't know who he was. Speaking of which, the price of these floors was really not low. Hundreds of millions of yuan of real estate was directly thrown here. So this house was either bought by the construction company as a gift or casually thrown here by a particularly rich man who was not in a hurry to live in it. She thought about it and felt that such a rich man shouldn't have any evil intentions. Besides, the property manager said that the owner had never lived here, so she bought it with confidence. After taking a shower, she went to work. 2 days passed peacefully. Suddenly, she received a call from Xia Tian at 11 o'clock, saying that she was about to give birth and was about to enter the delivery room. Jinwon jumped up from the bed in shock. By the time she arrived at the hospital in the city center, it was already 20 minutes later. At this time, Xia Tian had already entered the delivery room. There were many people standing outside. She raised her brows when she saw a man dressed in a black SWAT police uniform push through the crowd and rush in. The moment he entered, he immediately grabbed the doctor and asked her how she was doing with a serious and concerned expression. Jinwon stood by the side and raised her brows. It seemed like this was the SWAT big brother Xia Tian mentioned earlier. She saw the bars and stars on his shoulders. It seemed like he had made many contributions in the anti-drug missions at the border this year. He was actually a colonel. He was really low-key when she met him at the police station. Xia Tian had called her before entering the delivery room. She had complained about how she didn't know when her man would come back, but now he had already rushed to the delivery room. Not bad, he was in time. At the very least, he didn't miss Xia Tian giving birth. Xia Tian was usually straightforward and generous. Although she only had Jinwon as her best friend, she had many other close friends, especially her colleagues from MN Group. Right now, many of them had rushed over. They all thought that her man wasn't by her side and were afraid that she would be alone in the hospital. So they rushed over to accompany and help. In the end, there were so many people that the outside of the delivery room was almost filled. Jinwon retreated a little. She would wait until the child was born. The hospital in the city center was where Qin Sighting worked. After hearing the news, Qin Sighting came to take a look at the floor of the delivery room. Jinwon had just retreated to the middle of the corridor when Qin Sighting arrived. The air conditioning in the corridor was slightly cold. He wore a thin windbreaker and a white coat. He had just finished a surgery and rushed over. Jinwon. Qin Sighting immediately saw Ji-Nuan, who was standing outside the crowd. Dr. Qin. Jinwon saw Qin Sighting, whom she had not seen for many years, and smiled at him. This is the delivery room. Why are you here? Miss Xia is your friend. In the past few years, She has often come to the hospital and can be considered a very close friend of mine. I heard that she is about to give birth, so I came to take a look. Enchanting placed one hand in the pocket of his white coat. Seeing that there were too many people in the delivery room, he did not approach. He only looked at Jinwan. I haven't seen you for 3 years. You look good. Jinwan, it's okay. No matter how one lives alone, one can always be happy. No matter how hard it is. At least the benefits are proportional to the effort. Enchanting lightly curved his lips. That's good. Men usually did not talk too much about relationships with women, nor would they gossip too much about other people's relationships. However, seeing that Jinwan seemed to be very happy living alone, he thought for a moment, and did not tell her about Immerse's completely different state in the past few years. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.